I mean, they do things. I mean, don't get me wrong. My mom worked for federal probation and parole when I was growing up, so I spent a lot of time at the courthouse, and I got to see some of the. I mean, they do some good stuff, right? They're important, but just like any industry, you're going to get some bad apples. So there's always going to be the potential for abuse, right? The problem is with that specifically, you have the ability to take away people's freedom.
Yeah,
and that's why I think it's scary. The bottom line is you have to be able to ask questions, not make assumptions, and there's why there's a presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Gabe Molina podcast.
How accurate is that these days? Because I feel like a lot of times people get, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, right. But like, of course, there's public opinion depending on the size of your case, right? Then the public gets involved with it. And man, we might be going into chartered territory that we shouldn't be. But like, I often look at the George Floyd case, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because when you look at that, what happened, I mean, there was plenty of video. We all saw it. And I sit there and I go, okay, you shouldn't have pulled him back out of the car, right? Mm-hmm. You had him in the car once. He said he couldn't breathe. The community's up in an uproar. You've already got him controlled in the back seat. Get him to the police station, But I think they ended up pulling him out because he said he couldn't breathe. He was having a hard time breathing. And I think that he had drugs in his system too. And then that's when the kneeling happened and all that other good stuff. But it's very interesting because immediately that police officer and I think a few other ones end up going to prison, right? Mm-hmm. And it was one of those, that was the first time that, and maybe, you know what, maybe he was guilty. Maybe he needed to go to prison. But that was the first time I ever felt like, oh, this guy's got no shot. Because if he doesn't go to prison, the city's going to be in an uproar, or the country, back then at that time. And so it's interesting because I feel like, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of times where I want to believe one thing, but what is reality, And I guess that's where, when we're talking about, getting a lawyer, that's why it's so important to have somebody to be able to represent you, because John Q. Public doesn't deal with that every day. Mm-hmm. We don't understand how things operate when they're not in the public view. One of the biggest eye-opening things for me was I got a speeding ticket in Corpus, man, and it was stupid because like the car was a Geo Metro, so my big body was in a Geo Metro, 3-cylinder, and I got pulled over, and the cop goes, "You're going 80 or 85, I think," and I looked at him and I said, "In this car?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then I got the ticket, and it said I was in a construction zone. And it was there like where Tinseltown is, right? Mm-hmm. And Crossroads, or whatever that road is. Well, guys were working like 60 feet in the air, and it still counted as a construction zone. And it was interesting because, man, with my work, like sometimes we get so busy, like I don't have time for anything. Okay. And so a buddy of mine like, "Dude, call a lawyer. Just have a lawyer handle it." And I was like, I was penny pinching, right? So I was like, okay, well, it's going to cost me $300, $320 if I go just do it myself, but this lawyer's going to do it for $450, but I don't have to leave work, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the lawyer's like, okay, it's handled. And so it was funny because I was asking him, and I asked a buddy, I said, "How did this happen?" And he was like, "Oh man, we have so many speeding tickets. We take them in there and we go, okay, here's a stack of speeding tickets. Can we just, it's done." Yeah. So, that's one of those things where it's like, not to be ugly, but a lot of people don't like or trust lawyers, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of lawyer friends, and I know one in particular. He's a shark, man. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to be because you're swimming with sharks, right? So a little bit of you has to be, but at the same time, there's got to be some compassion in what you do, right? And you being an injury lawyer, I think that's probably more so where that compassion needs to happen. If you're a divorce attorney, right, let's take everything. Yeah. But when it's somebody who's been in an accident or has lost a loved one due to an accident, like you're seeing people at their worst or at their most vulnerable, let's say. So I mean, what's the process for when a client comes to see you guys, how do you handle that? What's, let's say the first couple of days of an incident happening, what does that look like for you guys and for your clients?
Sure. So no, there are different, ways that happens depending on when they call us and who calls us. In the more catastrophic, and sometimes, situations involving fatalities, it's family members that are contacting us. And it can be anywhere from the day that it happens, or it could be 2, 3, 4 days. Sometimes it's weeks, right? Because they're focused on, is this person going to survive? Or how bad are their injuries? What can we, the family's just trying to mobilize to take care of the immediate family. For us, we have a dedicated team. We call it our intake team that, it knows what to ask, what to find out immediately, so that we can start working in the background, sometimes not in the background, even just being proactive and doing things like hiring our engineers, accident reconstructionists, you name it, to start putting together.
Oh, so y'all get that involved?
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Wow.
If we're retained from the beginning, then, and there is a need to do that. Sometimes there's not a need, and when I say not a need, I mean there are some incidents that occur, crashes that occur that on its face, you understand how it happened. You talk to the police, you get the report, and as a simple example, traffic is stalled out on, let's say, 1604. Commercial truck comes from behind and slams into the other vehicle, and these people are hurt, right? You don't need right away an accident reconstructionist to figure out how that happened.
Yeah.
Now we do use folks, investigators, a lot of times former DPS, who will, we send a letter out right away that they preserve the vehicle, because there's a lot of important electronic data in the module to figure out things like how fast were they going, when did they apply their brakes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So we and if you don't preserve that right away, it can be overridden. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the first things we do on those cases where you've got catastrophic injuries, serious injuries, or fatalities, is to immediately tell them to take that truck off the road. And sometimes it already is, because it's mangled, right? Mm-hmm. But you need that information, and sometimes also the GPS information that's within the truck. So as I've been doing this for 20 years now, and that stuff is now standard, to whereas before, you didn't, a lot of, these trucks didn't have dash cams, didn't have GPS, things like that. And so now it's more the exception than the rule if it doesn't have those things that can help you piece the evidence together. Mm. So, but yeah, no, what you said earlier is right about the compassion part of what we do. I mean, to use your speeding ticket analysis, right, or example, it's not keeping you up at night, right? Like it's more of a nuisance than anything else. But it gave you a little bit of an insight into, well, how does this system work? Wait a minute, like I just pay this guy and it all goes away, and like what is this? And that's a different. I don't do that type of work, but I know that I know that that's how it works, because those lawyers that do traffic citations do them in bulk, do them in volume, mm-hmm. right? And I think for the courts it's more efficient when you're dealing with that, sure. and getting them resolved in mass than having 100 lawyers representing 100 tickets. Yeah. And truthfully, I don't think I don't know too many lawyers that do those, and so I imagine the ones that do, they get a lot. Yeah. And yeah, no, but sometimes they go to trial. I know I talked to a lawyer last week or the week before last, who's a city attorney for one of the small towns around San Antonio, in addition to his private practice, and he was in multiple trials all day on speeding tickets, people that were challenging them, and I thought that's interesting. But yeah, every area of law is different in terms of the process, in terms of public perception. You had mentioned, the George Floyd situation. I think one of the things that's changed over the years is it was captured on video, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. And I think the question that was posed was like, what if it wasn't captured on video? How many times does this happen that we don't know about? And so it brought up a lot of broader questions, right? And without getting into, verdict wrong or right or any of that stuff, I think having, where we're at now, where body cams are usually universal, right?
People have them in their vehicles,
right, in the vehicles, but for police officers too,
Sure.
right? I know that, with my friends who are in law enforcement, I think maybe there was some like initial resistance on it, but I think now if I'm in their shoes, I want that, so that if questions are asked later, let it speak for itself,
Yeah.
right? And so yeah, it's with it, just like lawyers, law enforcement. I mean, anybody that has the authority and the power to make decisions that affect people's freedom, judges, politicians. I mean, that's a lot of power, and I don't think it's fair to cast a wide net and say that everybody that is in that role is abusing that, because it's not true,
Sure.
right? But I also think, like anything, I think I mentioned earlier, is like you're always going to have, it's human nature. You're always going to have bad apples in any group. There is no profession that is immune from the potential, not just the potential, but the guarantee for there to be abuse.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question are there some bad apples in that group? Sure, because they're human beings. But it's how do we, how can we identify, how can we hold accountable, and things like that. So, and it's lawyers, as you said earlier, like the perception out there. I mean, unfortunately, you and I don't have a percentage, but let's say it's 10-1, right? For every 10 lawyers, you got one bad apple, let's say. But it's that one bad apple that gets, all the attention and all
Sure.
the focus, right? You don't hear about the other 9. And so to me, it used to bother me, especially being a personal injury lawyer, because like you're an ambulance chaser, you're this,
Right.
you're that. And that used to really bother me, but it doesn't anymore, just because, I know what I do. I know the role I know what I've done for people. I know what I've done for families, as well as the people that work with me. And we have our mission, we have our core values, and sometimes, we get lumped into group, as a whole, with stereotypes that are inaccurate and unfair, but it doesn't slow us down from doing what we're doing.
Is there anything in this? Does the state board get involved when there's a lawyer who's not practicing on the up and up, let's say, and it's kind of one of those things where, like at my job, we know who the guy who's slacking off all the time,
Right.
Or is making the mistakes or is doing things. And so is there something similar to that where, we've got a group of lawyers in a certain area and, there's one or two that everybody knows they're not on the up and up. And does the state board get involved at some point?
Absolutely. So we have the state bar that has also the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, and so they are the entity that investigates. So anybody can submit a complaint on a lawyer. It's you go to the website, fill out a form, and they then do an investigation into that. Now,
Is that a complaint that you can file anonymously, or is that something where
you can't file it anonymously.
Okay.
Yeah, you do have to identify yourself, simply because they're going to have questions and
good.
need information, right?
I hate the anonymous thing?
Yeah,
so.
yeah, no. It's not a Google review,
Yeah.
right? Because that's another story. But and so then they investigate, and then it goes to grievance committees, right? And I've been on one now for 3 years here locally. I'm on the grievance panel, and it's composed of 2 to 3 lawyers and 1 public member. So it's great to have participation from the general public that hear what are what is the investigation, what is a complaint, what are the rules, the professional rules that have been potentially violated. And then there's a recommendation from disciplinary counsel. Sometimes it's, we looked into it and we don't think that there are any violations here, but second set of eyes, you guys have to agree with us on that. And, we typically, if they've come to that conclusion, we look at it and double check, and that's dismissed. Other times it elevates into a hearing. It can be it's an investigatory hearing, an evidentiary hearing, where we sit on a panel, and the lawyer, and sometimes their lawyer, because they'll lawyer up, and then the complainant, right, which is often a client or former client, are asked questions and present their case as to why, was there or was there not a violation of certain rules. And so then we make a decision, and then that becomes a recommendation, and then a process typically of negotiation between, if there was a finding that there were rules violated, recommendation for some form of punishment that can range anywhere from a private reprimand, depending on the history, to a suspension, to recommending that they have their license taken away. So yes, there is a process in place for that, and having been doing that for 3 years on the panel, I can tell you that I think it is a good process, and it holds lawyers that need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
So.
Is there any sort of I guess, let's say you've got a client that was a client of a lawyer that was not practicing correctly or doing things that he or she shouldn't have been doing. Is there something that, whatever type of lawyer it was, let's say he had a potential client who missed out on some money they could have made off of a lawsuit, or let's say it was a lawyer where the client went to prison for some reason. Is there a process for somebody to be compensated or made whole that was a client of that lawyer? Or do they just file a civil lawsuit, or how does that kind of work out for somebody that was kind of, I guess, went to them, trusted them, turned out he wasn't on the up and up? They're the ones at the end of the day, they're the, I guess, they've missed out on whatever, right? Whether it was a lawsuit or whether it was prison time or whether it was, however they were being represented. Is there some process they can take to challenge whether it was a verdict, or even potentially go after that lawyer for monetary?
Well, there's always, so there's an appeal process for any civil case or a criminal case, right? On the criminal side, I don't do criminal, but you see that sometimes when there's ineffective assistance of counsel appeals that are made, right? And on the civil side, there is a difference between what would be considered conduct that violates the rules of professional conduct versus malpractice, legal malpractice, right? And I guess maybe as an example, if you have say it's a personal injury case, and you hire a lawyer that maybe didn't take all the depositions they should have, or hired all the experts they should have, and as a result that person doesn't get the result that they should have. While that may not be something that lawyer can be disciplined for specifically, it's certainly something that the client could look at if they were looking to assert a malpractice claim. And you see that all the time. I say that all the time, but there are certainly, especially like in commercial litigation, I think maybe more, where you've got companies suing companies, and then a lot of money on the line. And it's not uncommon later on down the road for one of those big companies to go back after their lawyers and say, you screwed this up, and these are my damages. So it's certainly possible. There's just different avenues depending on what it is that they believe occurred.
And I guess that's why there's the panel, right? To be able to say, hey, there's a difference in between doing something nefarious and just not doing your job well, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, did you knowingly do something that was illegal, let's say, or did you just do a poor job? And I guess that's where you guys come in.
Right, exactly. And it's, there's, rules around conflicts of interest, disclosures, the handling of money, is there's very specific rules that apply to lawyers with we call them IOLTA accounts or trust accounts, and where we for personal injury doesn't we work off of a contingency fee. We don't take money from our clients up front. It's only if we win then it's a percentage. So
Okay.
but for other lawyers, criminal, family, other types of lawyers where there is money being paid as sometimes a retainer that's not earned until they've put in a certain number of hours, for example, right? And it goes into a special account called an IOLTA account, and they have to account for their time and be able to bill for that. It's a lot of record keeping. And sometimes you have to be. I mean, you see situations where it may not have been the lawyer trying to do anything shady or illegal or anything like that. They don't teach you how to run a business in law school.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And that applies to anybody. And I think, if there's an area where I think, legal education can improve is in there are ethics, there's an ethics course, don't get me wrong. But it's one thing to learn about something conceptually, but it's another thing to learn about it and how to practice.
Yeah. Right.
And so law school does, it teaches you how to think like a lawyer, but it doesn't teach you how to practice. And so, I feel like there's just a lot of preventable things that occur. Good lawyers, good people with good intentions that maybe had there been more focus on how to execute certain things, especially for those that run their own practice, you wouldn't see. And then it just snowballs, right, for a lot of folks, like a lot of business owners, I think. Like, you got payroll, taxes, HR, you name it, the utilities, and there's just so many things you have to do, and it's overwhelming for some folks. I mean, for a lot of folks, and so I think sometimes I feel like some of this comes from that part of it, and then not to mention handling your cases.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was going to school, I went to a little bit of school, but. When I got out of there, man, I was super cocky. I thought I knew it all. I'm ready. Even at one point, it took me longer to finish because at one point I was like, I don't need to finish. I already know what I'm doing. Super arrogant, George. It was terrible. But in hindsight, I look back at 48 and I go, okay, well, what would I tell 18 or 19-year-old Gabe? Mm-hmm. And so now that you're down the road and you've worked on both sides of personal injury, what do you wish, whether it was at the college level or as these younger attorneys, start working on their own practices or go to work for somebody, what is something that you wish that, whether it was a mentor or the school, would spend more time on teaching these younger attorneys?
Well, it's different for everybody, I think, because I think everybody has areas. I mean, everybody has, like anything else, strengths and weaknesses, right? For me, in my background and what I did before becoming a lawyer, it led to a strength that is dealing with people, and I say dealing, that's a bad thing, but in being able to have empathy and compassion and communicate. And those were because I did.
Is that natural for you, or do you work on that, do you think?
It's tough to separate. I mean, I always like to work on it.
Yeah.
But I've had that since, when I was, when I grew up in Del Rio, my mom worked at the federal courthouse she was a secretary for federal probation and parole, which was, my insight into the first time into like legal process, right? When I would be able to go to the office and see, a courthouse and people going to work there, and then my dad worked at the Ford dealership. And so, that was an important part of, I think, what led me to where I'm at and what makes me effective at what I do, because I got to overhear and see a lot of the salespeople forming relationships with customers and listen to how they interacted. And
on that level, on that level, that's something where that's a special skill when they're good at it, because you're trying to create a relationship instantly.
Right.
And it's not, hey, I've gotten to know you over 6 months and you're a cool dude, right? It's more of a, instantly I've got to build rapport with you. Yep. So that's an art in itself.
It is. And then seeing how they take care of them, right? And how they're there to listen to what their needs are and figure out what, and I know just like lawyers, car salesmen have reputations too, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, I mean, I think it was an insight into that dynamic of instantaneous connection, human connection, and yeah, it was a sales pitch at the end of the day, but you get there through connection, and you could see the difference between those that did it well and those that didn't, and so that and then that led, when you're going back to, is that something that came natural to me? I started, I guess before I started doing debate in high school, when my parents divorced and moved to Waco for a year. And that was the first time that I started debating when I was a freshman in high school.
How'd you end up in Waco?
So my parents divorced, and my mom, we got transferred to Waco through the federal probation parole.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your mom was in, okay.
Yeah. So we got.
That's a huge difference, Del Rio and Waco.
Oh, that was man.
If you just said San Antonio or Austin, that's a little more. But
it was a culture shock. Yeah. I mean, I was in Del Rio. Even though Del Rio is a border town, is a lot different than some of the other border towns that some that I've lived in, like in McAllen, and my wife's from Laredo. All the border towns are always different. Everybody thinks that you paint them with a broad brush, and it's not true.
Yeah.
Del Rio is different in that it has an Air Force base, a big ranching influence there too, and so. But I think I'm estimating what the percentage is. I would assume I think it was like 70-80%. Hispanic, and maybe more, and then I go to. We moved to Hewitt, outside of Waco. I went to Midway High School, and I was like a high school of like 400 or 500 people, and I was like one of 7 or 8 Hispanics, right? Yeah. And so that was but in the end, I mean, it's good because then you learn how to, acclimate into different folks. I think the harder part, it wasn't necessarily the, sort of the ethnic component of it. It was just that, I'd grown up for so long with lifelong friends, going from one community to another. And that was the more difficult change part. Yeah. So it was we were there for actually less than a year. But what was cool about that was that they had a debate team that you could participate in as a 9th grader, and I immediately signed up for that.
What drew you to that?
I'd always wanted to do debate.
Really?
I always had this passion for,
because debate's different than just talking trash with your buddies, right?
Right.
There's a strategy to debate.
Yeah.
There's one for your buddies too, but it's different.
It's different. Yeah. And I was always drawn to that. And my grandfather on my mom's side was a JP at the time, Justice of the Peace, and a very I don't want to say politician because he wasn't, but he was in education, he was a principal, and just his sort of presence and being able to communicate, and it was always very powerful. My grandfather on my dad's side was a rancher, a welder, and so it was a very interesting blend of that, those two, and so I became very tactical.
Those are hardworking, important jobs, right? Because when you're, ranching and welding is very difficult in itself, but even on the ranching side, you're responsible for maintaining the livestock, right? Which is in itself caring for something else, right. And then being a judge on the other side and a principal at a school, there's a lot of interaction with different types of people. And there's a lot of responsibility in that too, right? Because like we talked about earlier, sometimes you're sending people to prison and you have to, now maybe not on the JP side, but you're still involved in people's lives, right? And if you make a mistake, not only are you impacting that person, you're impacting their family as well, right? And even if it's
generational,
it's generational, right? And so even I sit there and I think about people that I used to work at a jail, so we had the JPs coming from time to time. Really nice people doing a good job, but they see and I think this is kind of connected to you too. You guys see so many different types of people, right? And you want to start off with compassion. Some people are in their worst place that they've been. Some people have just lost a loved one. And then there's some people just trying to make a dime off of a fender bender, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like you guys have to be able to, lead with compassion, but still be street smart enough to find the BS, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's, Yeah, it's an acquired skill for sure. But one of the things that actually my grandfather, who was a principal before, did that actually throughout his life was he would go into the jails and meet with the inmates, prisoners, with the Bible. And I have one of his books that he used to take with him called Alone with God. It's actually in my office. It's a daily reading and interpretation. And so, but that's all compassion, right?
Yeah.
That's all compassion. He wasn't getting paid. That was just something he did that meant a lot to him. To be able to reach out to someone in a moment like that, in a tough spot, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was I think those were traits and on both sides that became part of my sort of DNA. And my grandfather was actually on the principal side, was the first principal of the consolidated schools in Del Rio. So they had two high schools for the longest time, North and South, that were, for all intents and purposes,
The white and the brown.
Exactly. And they were ordered to be consolidated, and he was the first principal of the consolidated school.
Oh, wow.
And so there were some interesting times back then. But he'd always had a passion for not just education, but development, youth, and helping folks out that in a vulnerable spot. Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess we were talking about Waco, and then
Well, let's pause real quick, because I do want to ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you've got a lot of impactful people in your life at a young age. What are some of the traits you think you acquired most from them, and what are some that you wish you had a little bit more in you? Because it sounds like you're working with a lot of hardworking people who are intelligent and are personable, compassionate. Because even on your mom's side, working in that type of job, when you work at a whether it's a public school or let's say it's a county courthouse or on the federal side, people that interact in those places or they come to those places for services, I don't care what you've got going on today. My problem's the most important,
right.
And I'm sure you see that in your practice as well. But it's like, what are some of the traits you think that you acquired naturally, and what are some of the things you wish you maybe had acquired a little bit better and you're working on?
The stuff that I've acquired that I think has been, a cornerstone of where what I do now, were some of the things I mentioned earlier, right? Compassion, empathy, and to turn those things, like what do I wish I there are the functional things. Like I sometimes and I talked about this recently actually at a talk I was doing about marketing on specifically to the Latino community. But I feel conflicted sometimes because I didn't learn. I wasn't taught Spanish, and I had to kind of pick it up. Man. Yeah. So that's one thing, and I know that's not kind of what you were asking, but it reminded me.
No, it is.
That.
It is.
And then some of those more functional skills that I've learned some of them, but around I don't know, the ranch or things like that, right? Like being able to have that as a common bond to my previous generations, where I can say I worked at a ranch, I knew how to handle this, I knew how to handle that. But apart from that, I think where it becomes challenging on compassion, empathy, and is being able to detach yourself from taking that and living with that and breathing that and coming home with that. And so it's something that I have to work on, that I still work on, but I think you have to be able to balance out.
Are you kind of saying, and I feel like you're saying this, but correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you're saying that compassion and that empathy, even though it's always in you, it's almost like, it's funny because Nina comes home and everybody loves Nina at school, right? And it's like, okay, well, there's two Ninas, right? There's the school Nina and there's the one I get at the house, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like she says, sometimes she gets frustrated at home, and it's like, she's like, I literally leave it all at work, you know? And is that kind of
Yeah.
what you're saying too? Like, you come home and maybe you're not as compassionate or as you are when you're at work because it's done so much. You know, you see so many people. Right. You know, it reminds me of when I used to work with these kids in Driscoll, Texas, and there was a lot of problems with them. And it was interesting because I just left the jail, went over here, and they're like little inmates. You know, like literally they'll cause a fight on one side of the building so they can attack a kid in the back dorm, you know? And it was funny because when I went home, my little nieces and nephews, like I saw that their behavior, and it mentally I was applying it to what I was seeing at work. And it frustrated me because all of a sudden it wasn't just them being little kids. In my brain, I was like, well, are you doing this on purpose? Because this is what I saw earlier today.
Yeah.
So is it kind of similar to that, where you have a hard time, you know, bringing some of that good that you use at work all the time back home, and you know, a lot of it is just being tired, I'm sure. But
yeah, something you're mentally, emotionally exhausted sometimes, and I think it is a part of that where I wouldn't compare what I would be doing during the day to say like it's a sort of like a paternal role, but there are a lot of similarities to where you spend your days looking out for someone else. As in my mentality, and something I told people in the office is like, we represent people like they are our family, right? And I think there's a lot of good that comes out of that, and there has been, and I think our culture at the firm embodies that. Where that can get tricky and challenging is that when you are emotionally and mentally playing that role day in, day out at the office, in court, in depositions, mediations, you name it. Yeah, how you know, we all have a stove with burners, right? And there's only so much that can be turned on, and there are some days more than others,
right?
Clearly, right. But either way, it's certainly an area where I've identified that as, okay, you know, I got to have a strategy for reserving a piece that I know will still be burning. The burner's still there for me to turn on when I get home, right? Because I may have fixed, or I may have not, you know, fixed, but I've attended to what I needed to, but there's still a lot more to attend to, and more importantly, at home, you know. And but that's it. And again, I think it's something that is not it's not always there, but it's something that I'm certainly aware of, and make sure to separate that and realize, like, okay, just because you may have taken care of this, you know, doesn't mean you're done for the day.
Right.
It's just getting started.
Well, the little ones have no clue what you did that day.
Exactly.
You know, they just know you're dad, and now you're home, right? And now it's my turn to get dad's attention, right? And it's interesting because, like, it's very tricky, I think. We talked earlier, we didn't have kids, but it's interesting because I watch my buddies, and I'm real close to them, and I'm real close to their children. And, like, at the age group that you have right now, that's probably the best, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because, like, little ones they're that age group for only a short period of time. And it was funny because, you know, we always go, well, you turned 18, you're an adult, right? And it's funny because I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he said, man, he goes, our kid, they have a great relationship with him, but they're like, he quit being that kid that we had when he started driving. Because now he doesn't need a ride. You know, we give him money for food. You know, he wants to socialize with his friends. He goes, so we didn't lose him at 18. So we lost him at 15, 16. Mm-hmm. You know, so that time frame with those, and then when they're smaller, before they get to that point, you know, it seems like 12 or 13 or maybe even younger, you know, they're more focused on their friends from school, you know, or they might get a little crush on somebody. And so it's like that time frame that you have with them where they're all yours is really short, you know. So you want to make the best use of that time, I guess. But it's tough when you got a serious job like what you've got. So
yeah, no, it is, and fortunately, you know, of my wife is, you know, makes it a lot easier to manage that. And I think one of the things that's interesting that I think it would look a lot different if it hadn't been for actually COVID, when we then started, you know, everything became remote and we had Zoom. And so the amount of travel that I have to do now versus before, I mean, I still have to travel sometimes, but it's a lot less. So that, I think, has been an opportunity to be able to spend more time at home than I otherwise would be. So, you know, there's ways to, and also I think my kids understand, you know, that at the end, what I'm doing in helping and sometimes ask questions too. So it's good. And I think it's you know, I think I try to do a good job of balancing, is what I'll say. Is it perfect? No.
Sure.
But it's always a work in progress. But the key is knowing where those weaknesses, where those needs, where those challenges are, acknowledging them and versus pretending like they don't exist, and it being a work in progress. So,
yeah. You know, we were talking about guy stuff earlier, and it's funny because, like, even though it's just me and Nina, our nephew, moved in with us recently, but I started working remote, right? And it's one of those things where, you know, I grew up with a workaholic, you know, and so it was like, if there's fun or there's work, go do the work, right? And so even at 48, you know, Nina will come home, she wants to talk about her day, but I'm still working, and so it's crazy because, like, a lot of times you're hyper focused and your brain is here, right? It's in your monitor, right? And so I have to consciously go, dude, stop. Take 5 minutes and just listen or have a conversation. And it's different to go let her talk while I'm still working, but it's a different conversation when I can stop, turn and look at her and make eye contact and actually listen, you know? And it's funny because, like, I want to prioritize my work, right? Because especially us not having kids, like, I don't want to say that, I'm not going to say that fulfills me, but that makes me feel good because it feels good when you're doing something positive and productive, right? And so, like, I don't want to detach from that. And sometimes I catch myself going, just hurry up, you know, let me say what you got to say. That way I can get back to what I'm doing, you know? And it's tough because I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that goes, oh, really? Great. I'm glad it went well. Or, oh, that's terrible. You know, maybe tomorrow I'll be better. I want to be that guy, right? I'm trying to be less of the hurry up, get it over with so I can get back to what I'm doing. And I think that's a balance that, like, if you're not conscious of it, then you could really screw up in the wrong direction, right?
Oh yeah. 100%. It's, you know, what you said is absolutely right, where work, and I'm the same way. Like, I'm you know, trying to be a productivity guru, hack, and any little thing I use technology, especially now with AI, to help manage multiple projects. And I'm you know, not outside of the law. I've got other business projects too that I'm trying to get off the ground. And at the end of the day, right, it's like, I'm 45, I turned 46 in a month. It's like, what is this all for? Like, what's the end zone here?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you know, and I see examples in many industries, but I guess because of mine, I see it in mine, where it's like, I don't want to be the hamster on the wheel.
Sure.
You know? But what you said is right, where it's like, it feels, I think you said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I heard you say fulfilling, right? Like,
I didn't really want to use that word, but I did because I didn't have a better word for it. But yes.
Well, and I'll propose an alternative, which is, to me, that's what sort of drives the self-worth, right? Like, where I measure my own self-worth with how much did I get done?
Yes.
Right. And that becomes the, you know, the report card. My own, like my report card for myself.
Yeah.
You know, did I go to sleep with, how many emails were waiting for me in my inbox from today, or did I clear them all out? You know, did I get this, and that done? And the reality is, you know, I've found that even when it's like the dog chasing the car, right? What does it do once it catches it? It doesn't know what to do.
Sure.
And there have been times where I've like, oh, I actually knocked out all of this. Now what? Yeah. And whether you do or you don't, I mean, and obviously there's prioritization. There are things that absolutely do need to get done. But then there's also like realistically, like what happens if you do it? There's going to be more waiting for you tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Or is this really necessary? Or is it just that pressure we put on ourselves sometimes? Like that we need absolutely. And I think that comes for me at least from that mentality. That's maybe DNA generational. Like you always got to be moving, right? Like I always measure where I'm at in terms of being able to unplug and step away with, do I give myself 2 or 3 hours to watch a movie? Because that's, to me, it's like, I think at one point I was like, I'm sitting in front of this screen watching a made up plot with people pretending to be other people and just wasted 3 hours of my life. As opposed to what it should be, which is, this is a form of art and this is a great, whatever, genre you like, right? It's entertaining. And so I think it's all about how we spend our time on Earth. And I started reading a book, I haven't finished it, called 4,000 Weeks, which is the average human lifespan. You only have 4,000 weeks. And the author was talking about, like, if you go around asking people, like, how many weeks do you think we have on Earth on average? Some people are like 300,000 or like 50. And it's like, no one really realizes how finite our time is. And it's a question of how you want to spend it. And so, the story, I think, you hear that, these uber successful people at the end of their lives being asked, what do you wish you had done differently? And it's always the same. It's like, spend more time with my kids, my family, and or just loved ones, friends, and there's a lot of research to support that, that being what really is the common denominator with folks who are happy and experience joy on a regular basis, right? Is the depth and number of connections they have with those that meaningful relationships with. So yeah, I'm with you.
That's interesting because, like, we kind of talked earlier, and Dad was a workaholic. He always was working all the time. And so he kind of instilled that in us. And it's interesting because, we had mostly, I guess it'd be half and half, Hispanic, half white back home when I was growing up. But it was funny because, like, I didn't really see this. Some people did, but my exposure to it was different because I didn't really see the brown and white, right? We were all broke, right? That was the commonality there. Yeah. And so it was funny because, it's you leave your parents' house and you want to go acquire the things that you always wish you had had. And so I tell nephews and people, I'm like, you spend your first 20 years trying to get out of your parents' house. You spend your next 20 years trying to acquire all the things you wish you had. And then you're in your third 20 years and you're like, why did I buy all this stuff? You know what I'm saying? I tell Nina all the time, I'm like, before my nephew moved in, I said, it's just two of us in a 3-bedroom house and we have no room to put anything anywhere. It's like, it was really exciting buying these things or acquiring these things, but why do I have them? And it's funny because, Dad passed away, my brother Eddie passed away. And when they died, it was very quick. And so it was interesting because I didn't have any doubt that they didn't know that I loved them. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So now as I've gotten older and I go, okay, well, I bought all this stuff and that wasn't fulfilling. My relationship with these two was so good that when they passed away, yes, you're heartbroken, but at the same time, I knew they knew that I loved them.
Right.
And so, like, now I find myself looking around, since these two are gone, and I look around my immediate friends and family who I'm close with, and I go, who do I not have that type of relationship with? Where, like, if they died tomorrow, we knew that we loved each other. you know? And it's like, and so it's funny because now I find myself, I'm not perfect at it, but I try and find myself working on these relationships where when you die, I don't want you to worry that how I felt about you. We already knew, right? So when you go, hey, he knew there was no problem. Right. And so it's funny because like, it's a different Gabe, and it comes with age and experience and all kinds of stuff. But, 20 to 40-year-old Gabe just wanted stuff.
Right.
40 to 60-year-old Gabe doesn't care about stuff. You still need to make money. You still need to make a living. Yes, there's some things that are nice to get. There's things you want to be able to provide for others. But it's like, it's funny because that's one thing that I wish if I had talked to 20-year-old Gabe, I'd have gone, dude, chill out with stuff. Go see your loved ones more often. Go spend more time with that. But at the same time, work, and maybe you're a similar person where it makes me feel good when I'm productive, man. Mm-hmm. Makes me feel good when I did everything that was on my plate for the week, right. And I'm coming in. I'll even work weekends sometimes because I want to come in Monday fresh, right? Mm-hmm. And but at the same time, I'm like, there's still people I need to pay attention to. Right.
And I don't think it's let me clarify. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that if you work doing something that you enjoy, you should, right? That's the goal. And it sounds like you do, and I clearly do.
I think I enjoy the feeling of being productive, but what I do for a living isn't nearly probably as fulfilling as what you do. Because I think what you do is you bring somebody in on the personal injury side. Mm-hmm. Somebody comes into your firm, they've experienced something terrible, and now you're a partner with them to get them someplace better. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like being a school teacher, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's funny because we talked about adopting kids and it didn't happen, but we have these conversations and Nina's like, you need to get involved with something else, right? And she's like, I'm with kids all day. She's like, these are literally my children. Mm-hmm. She goes, at school, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, they're my babies. She's like, so when I come home, it's like sending the kids to go stay with the grandparents, right? Yeah. And so she's like, you don't get that. So it's interesting. We're all over the place, man, but it's interesting because like the Kinetic Kids thing. Mm-hmm. So at one point, she's like, you need to go do something. And this is my thing is I think I'm a decent guy, but I'm also still Gabe from Georgia West, right? So like there's the big brothers,
big sisters,
yeah, that kind of thing. So we talked about that at one point. I looked into it and I was like, man, I don't know if I have that in me, right? Because that's a very serious thing. I have a friend of mine that works at the Child Bereavement Center, and I think she's running that place right now. But it's interesting because she's like, if you can't come here and commit, we don't let you come here, because these kids get used to seeing you. They need you to be here every day, that you said you're going to be here. And when you don't come, it's so interesting because she said when they don't come, the kids associate that with death. Mm-hmm. You didn't come today. You were supposed to come. You come every Wednesday. But did you die? And she's like, that's where the kids go in their brain. She says, so if we can't get people to commit like that, we don't even get them started. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting involved with Kinetic Kids, and I haven't done it in a while, man. But Nina got me big into like the special needs community. And so I used to work the train over at Morgan's Wonderland for a little. I didn't drive the train, but loading the kids on and off. And so eventually I got into the Kinetic Kids deal, and we did the swimming thing. And let me tell you something, man, that was a lot of fun. But this is the weird thing for me is I'm an old, overly attractive fat man. And so it's weird when you show up, and it was so awkward the first day because they're like, why are you here? And there was so many like early teens, or not early teens, early 20s girls that were like, what's part of college, right? We're coming here to get additional credits. Mm-hmm. And so, or volunteer hours. And then it was like, well, I've got a special needs, grandson, or I've got a special needs child. And then they get to me and I'm like, I just needed something to do, man. My wife wanted me out of the house. You know,
you can explain what she does for a living, but yeah,
I should.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of like, I needed to volunteer, you know, and I really enjoyed it. And the thing that I liked about it the most was how excited those kids were to get in the pool, you know, and I work in an engineering industry. And so like for me, I need things to be perfect, right? And having those kids and teaching them how to swim, it's not perfect. It was wild. And my favorite were some of the Down syndrome kids because they are ornery, and I love ornery things, man. But you know, I started doing some more research, and Nina kind of turned me on to it. And Kinetic Kids was so cool because of the variety of things that they offer these kids. Yeah. And you know, one thing that I get super pumped up about is Nina's kind of exposed me to a lot of things. Is these kids are so much fun, man. You know, and it's funny because like before Nina got involved, which was at the Reddick Center, I think that was her first job. I had some interactions years ago with some special needs kids. And so the mentality was for what I saw other adults doing, which was like this, I don't know the word, but it was almost like sympathy toward the kid just because they were special needs, right? And it was almost like people led that way. Like, and it was funny because I'll give you some back history on Nina, man. She's probably gonna hear this, but like Nina, her getting involved in special needs is wild because there was nothing. It's almost like God got involved. Because there was nothing that connected her to that community at all, you know? And it wasn't even like she had aspirations to be a special needs teacher. It was kind of like, hey, I need a job. I'm going to go get the certificate. I'm going to start teaching. And they were like, well, you can get, this is like 19 years ago, however long she's been teaching. It was like, okay, well, you can get a stipend if you do math, science, ESL, or English as second language, or ASL, or ALE, whatever it was. Yeah. And so she's like, I hate math, I hate science, and I don't speak Spanish. She's like, I'm going to go teach special needs kids. And I was like, okay, you know. And she went to the Reddick Center, which is post-high school, right? And it was difficult for her in the beginning because of the physicality of it. Like some of these kids she's a small person, you know, these are, I think 18 to 22 year olds, you know? And so, man, she came home beat up pretty good a few times. Wow. But like, she loved it, you know? And it was so weird because I would tell her, I don't know why you're so good at this, you know? And she would say, she's like, I don't know either. I just really like it. And it was funny to go into her classroom and watch these kids because it was different than what I was used to. You know, Nina was like, hey, there was not really like this, sympathy type thing. It was, we need to get this workbook done. You know, are we doing it at your desk or are we doing it under the desk?
Right.
You know, under the desk. All right. And so Nina's very good at puzzles. And she would tell me, she said, look, something gets these kids to be productive. Something gets them to go off. You got to figure out what it is. And it might be day to day. It might be every day. It might be something different all the time. She's like, right. You just got to figure it out. And it's funny because like, she's really good at that, man. And I don't understand why. Like, I don't know her to be this good at anything, but there's been times where like you'll go into her classroom and it's like, everybody line up. We're shaking hands. We're introducing yourself, So all the kids will line up and they'll do it. And it's funny because she's often said, she goes, everybody tries to treat these kids differently. She goes, I treat them like every other kid. The only difference is what motivates them to be productive. Is it screen time on the laptop? Is it, sitting with me for a little while? What is it? And she's like, you just got to figure that out. And
you unlock the keys.
Yeah. And it's funny because, again, we're going all over the place today, but it's interesting because some of the teachers that I've seen that haven't done very well in special needs and the ones that do very well are very different. I feel like some of the teachers that don't do well, they often want their classroom to look like a general education classroom where everybody stay in your chair, sit at that desk for 8 hours and do what you're told. And like Nina's like, it's the Wild West at my place. They might need to do it under the desk. She had one girl, I won't use names, but at her last school, and she rebranded herself, but tore up the classroom once a week. And Nina said, what's funny is she would destroy the classroom. We'd take all the kids, put them in the classroom next door. And I would sit there and make sure she didn't hurt herself, but I'd let her tear it up. And she got done, and she goes, the good thing about her was she was really good at cleaning. She goes, so we get done, and like, are you done? Yes. You ready to clean? Yes. All right, let's clean. And she's like, you just got to work with these kids and understand them individually. But so then going back to the Kinetic Kids thing, like that, I would apply a lot of the things that I learned from her. And when you kind of see it through that perspective where, hey, we're just doing things differently. We're still going to get to a goal, whatever the goal is, but we're going to do it differently. Man, it's so much fun, man. Yeah. That community is so much fun.
No, it's been, being part of that has been, amazing. As you know, Luis, my oldest son, is on the spectrum, and he's a student at her, in Miss Molina's class. I don't call her Miss Molina. And what you just described is I can relate to because I see it with Luis. Yeah. Especially when I get him in line with saying, I'm going to tell Miss Molina, no. I was like, that is my trigger. But yeah, with Kinetic Kids, I had enrolled Luis we had put him into a Kinetic Kids activity. I don't remember which one was the first. It may have been soccer or baseball. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, and then seeing what they were doing, and then it's very different. There are no expectations as far as, we need you to be here at this point, or it's just, I say customized, but it's based on what they can do in their terms. Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, I was really impressed with what was being done. And then I got more involved. I've been on the board now for going on 4 years now, actually. And it's very meaningful work. The people, the group, some are parents of kids with special needs as well. Some aren't, but they just are drawn to the mission, and it's been growing. It's been growing. And so one of the things that's really an aspect of it that I think maybe doesn't get as much attention, because as the attention should be, it's on the kids, but the volunteer component of this, right, yeah. Where you have people, high school, college. Or just adults,
old creepy dudes,
yeah, right, driving the train, or whatever it was you would know. But for a lot of these folks, this is their first time in terms of an exposure interaction with a special needs community or individuals, right? And for that, the level of education that provides and the experience is tremendous, right? Because that's one of the things that I think is missing, that we need to really improve upon, is for those that don't have individuals with special needs in their orbit, is putting them into that so that they can learn and understand and see and there are a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions that go with it, that I think once you are around it, it's different, and someone. I mean, I know as a parent, it's completely different. As you're with what your wife does, it's different, right? Yeah. And so I think it's been great. Kinetic Kids has been great. It's funny you mentioned Big Brothers Big Sisters. I had done that. I was in it for 8 or 9 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think I started in 2007, 2008, and all the way through when he was 7 or 8 years old, and I followed him all the way through when he graduated from high school.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That was a really cool experience. That's something that I think is a great program and does a lot of good. Now, not all my attention on the nonprofit side is focused on special needs and Kinetic Kids. But I think Big Brothers Big Sisters is just a tremendous, amazing program. I mean, I always say about that, like, I almost felt like I was being mentored.
Really?
Yeah, because you know, you are exposed in a different way, in a different role. I didn't have kids, wasn't married, and my little Jose was first generation. Families from Mexico. They lived in the West Side in a very, very small house that didn't even have an AC or anything in San Antonio, right? Like, it's tough. And it was, in growing up, we had our economic, challenges and realities, and, especially, after my parents had divorced, and then, living in a small apartment, you name it, right? But then you see something like that, it puts it all into perspective, right? It's kind of like success, right? Like, it's always, we're talking about people like always trying to, what's next? What more can I get? What's next? There's always going to be someone with more or this and that if you're going to be chasing that, you'll never stop chasing.
Yeah.
On the flip side, in when things are challenging, there are folks that are going through even more, right? And it helps sometimes to put things, not to feel just necessarily better, but to put it in perspective, right? There is hope. There is a way. There is, you do have things to be grateful for, even when times are challenging, right? And so that experience through the years was impactful for me in seeing, this is in a neighborhood that I would otherwise never be driving through and stopping at and going back, and
Sure.
And folks that I would never. And to me, it's all about that. Like, we're talking about connection is the more that I can get through avenues and people who I would otherwise not come across is, to me, really as special, right? Especially at this age, right? Because we live in our silos and in our worlds, and normally it's just rinse and repeat with the same folks, and that's great. And don't get me wrong, I
Sure.
enjoy seeing some of the same folks, but when there's opportunities to have meaningful connections with people through things like that is really special, And I was at a meeting on Friday on a little investment or real estate thing, a project we're doing on a downtown concept. And, just talking to some of the people sitting around the table, none of them lawyers, and hearing, how they got to where they're at. And it's just really cool,
Yeah.
And so Big Brothers, Big Sisters for me did that. And I learned a lot about myself, but about others through that. And it was cool. It was cool to, and then, seeing him graduate from high school was cool. And then, but Kinetic Kids is special because, like I said, it is for a lot of the volunteers, sometimes their first time being around the special needs community, and I think that the dividends that will pay many years later, even after the season is wrapped up, is you can't quantify that.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting. I feel like San Antonio does a really good job with the special needs community. I haven't been to a lot of other places, but it seems like San Antonio, Morgan's Wonderland came in. They've built all kinds of things over there right now. There's, I think they have the Mac Center now, but there's also a hospital that's right next to that. I did a podcast with the folks at the little hospital before the Mac Center went up. And it's a great little place. They've got this great pool that they can work with kids. It's kind of like a physical therapy type place. And then, of course, Kinetic Kids, and they're involved. They're all over the city, They've got all kinds of different things to do. And it's interesting because, like, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think what Kinetic Kids does and what Morgan's does and, just the community in general is integrate special needs kids and whatever you call a standard kid or whatever to participate in playing together, right? Like, as a kid, you just want to play. You want to play with other kids. You want to play with your friends. And it doesn't, it's funny because, like, special needs kids no different.
Right.
You know, they want to see their friends. They want to have a good time. You know, maybe communication's a little bit differently, but play's pretty friggin' universal, you know? And when I see that, when I see like parks that do that, when I think Mitchell's Landing has some, I get that cushiony playground floor and some other stuff that accommodates special needs people. And it's like, that gets me excited and a little watery-eyed.
Right.
Because, you know, I get excited for that, and I think, man, every place should do that. You know, and it's strange for whatever reason. You know, we've got a larger special needs community than we did 50 years ago. You know, but it's kind of like making efforts to integrate everybody. You know, it's huge, man. Yeah. It's huge. Yeah. It's funny you were talking about chasing people and money. I had a thought in my head. There's a cool Bob Marley video where they're interviewing him, and the interviewer asks him, "Are you rich?" And he says, "What do you mean, am I rich?" He says, "Are you talking about money?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, do you have a lot of money in the bank?" And he goes, "I got a little bit of money in the bank." He says, "But numbers never end." He says, "Money is numbers, and numbers never end. So if you're chasing money, you'll never find what you're looking for." He says, "I have a lot of love in my life." He says, "So in that way, I am rich." And it's interesting because every now and then I'll go watch that video, you know, because I love stuff, man. Nina loves experiences. I love things, you know. And sometimes I got to remind myself, hey, man, you're chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. I mean, we all have things we, you know, we were talking about historical items earlier.
Yeah, that's cool.
And yeah, I think to me, it's okay to. If it's not a status, you appreciate the whatever it is, right? Like whatever. I mean, there's a difference to me, at least, between things that you enjoy and appreciate, whether it be history, whether it be a craft, some people. Cars, they're passionate about cars. It's not because I want someone to see me driving this, but because they know the engine and they say, and to me that's different, right? There are passions, right? But then there are the, I think in life, those that just they're pure status symbols, right? And that's where I think it gets dangerous. You know? And you're right, as what you said is true. When growing up with very little or nothing. That becomes what you imagine. It's like, oh, when I make it, I'm gonna get this or that, and and then you do that. It's like, oh, well, nothing really changed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and then there's studies, right? There are a certain level of needs that you have to be able to meet that do equate to a level of happiness.
Sure.
But above that, they are no longer linear, right? It doesn't, in fact, sometimes it can be inverse depending on what the situation is. And so I think that's something I try to always be mindful of as well. It's just, and it's different with one thing that changes, with having a special needs child too, is that the trajectory in terms of, what most parents would expect. Oh, when they're 18, they go out of the house, go to college, get a job, support themselves, right? And it's certainly possible for some, but I know with others it's not, and we're always working toward it. That would be great, but if it doesn't happen, it's probably going to plan for that. And so the calculations are different, right? The what do I need to make sure to try to leave behind so that there are no unmet needs? That's always, and that's something that that I think about personally, and I imagine that a lot of other parents as well. I know they think about. So
I think that I mean, there's not always and always, there's never and never. But I think that's a dude thing, right? Like I feel like guys are constantly looking miles down the road. I know for me and Nina, it's that way. Nina's in the now, and I quit looking at the now 3 weeks ago. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm looking down the road, and it's funny because sometimes she's a teacher at the house, right? and she wants to control everything. And it's kind of like, okay, well, hang on, I've already thought this through, and because then she's processing it, and it's like, hang on, I've already thought about this, Tell you a very interesting story. There's a friend of ours. Her name's Letty. Letty I forget what it's called, but it's kind of when they run like the ALE department. I forget the name of the position, but she left that. Great story. We did a podcast. I'll have to send it to you, but in a nutshell, she adopted a special needs girl. She used to be her teacher. She adopted her. Letty was doing pretty well. I think she does okay now. But she quit her job right before her daughter graduated high school because she wanted to focus on what's going to happen to my daughter when she's out of high school. And so she ended up taking over. She bought it from the previous owner. It's called The Backyard. It's over off of like I-10 McCullough area. But it's basically like a day hab for adults with special needs. And it's interesting because same sort of thought process. She's like, at 16, it was like, what am I going to do when she turns 18? What am I going to do with her? So she actually went and bought a business that her daughter can go to for the rest of her life.
Oh, wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And she runs it now. Her daughter's doing great. Her daughter goes there every day. And these are her daughter's friends that she comes to see every day, and a lot of the special needs world, Nina always says consistency is huge, right? There's times where Nina's sick or she's tired, and I'm like, dude, just call in. And she's like, I can't. I'm like, why not? I'll call in. And she's like, if I don't show up, my kids are gonna have a bad day because they're used to me being there. So same thing with Letty and her daughter Stephanie. Letty's like, I needed the next step, right? And she had the foresight to do it early. So that way, when the girl graduated, Letty's already in control of this business. It's already up and running. And now she has a place to come every day. And great, wild story for Letty. But that's one of those things where a lot of times people don't think about that because you have so many years with them where they're in public school. But then it's like, okay, what happens when they're 20 or 30 or 45? I think Letty has some... I want to say she might have one or two that are in their 60s, a few that are in their 20s, and then everything in between. And it's like, that's what people don't really understand, and Letty made a good point in the podcast we did, and Nina and if parents are listening to this that have special needs kids, like that's the kind of thing where you need to start filling out paperwork for programs and things early, because a lot of that backlog, talking to Letty, it might be 10 to 15 years out.
Yep. So the social services, Texas Medicaid, it's at least a 10-year wait.
Yeah.
And that's a component that I think, if I was ever going to, do something else in the nonprofit sector, it would be with that. And there are some good services already, I think. And I know at the MAC, which is the Multi-Assistance Center, they do offer a program for parents of children with special needs, and also for adults with special needs that assist them with things like guardianships and a special needs trust and things like that. Because, a lot of what people need to get done can be very expensive from a legal process standpoint. And so that's something that I plan on focusing on more, in the future. So.
Yeah. I think that kind of thing is important. I think a lot of times, I don't necessarily want to say the Mexicano community, but I'll say the Mexicano community because that's a lot of what we have and a lot of what I've been exposed to is, I've got a special needs person or I've got a grandmother and we're going to take care of them. And, it was very similar with Dad before he passed, but, my mom's getting older and her parents were getting older. And it's kind of like, when I was a kid, it was this real bad stigma to take them to a nursing home, let's say. I still don't want to take them to a nursing home. But as I've gotten older, I've realized there is needs that I can't provide, and I think that happens in the special needs community where it's like a lot of people who don't know what's available to them or just going to do it themselves, you know? And at a certain point, whether I get too old or the person gets too old, you know, you really do, even though your intentions are good, there's a certain point where you can't provide what they need as well as somebody else could.
Right.
You know, so being able to be exposed to what's available to us, and again, the time frame, how long is that going to take to you know, get these services? 10 years, 15 years, you know, being able to educate the population on what's available to them and what the process is huge, man. Because by the time, let's say, you've got an elderly person that lives at your house, and let's say, my father-in-law he's wild, man. He's 92. He still mows the yard twice a week. He's in great shape. He's going to live to be way older than what he wants to. But like for him, you know, me and Nina talk every now and then about him, and it's kind of like, okay, well, what are we going to do with him? You know, because not that we need to do something with him, but you know what? He's going to live to be over 100, whether he likes it or not. You know, yes, we can take care of him, and I want him there, but what is that process like? You know, and how can we make it more appealing to him? You know, one thing that was eye-opening for me was when Dad was in rough shape, there was a lot of needs that he had. It didn't, you know, he couldn't do on his own. It all fell on Mom. And it was like, well, let us help you. And I never thought about it till we were in the midst of it, but it was kind of like, he didn't want it from us. You know, he didn't want to expose certain things of himself to us.
Right.
It was just comfortable with this person. You know, so I think about Nina's dad sometimes, or, you know, you may have a special needs child that's now in their 60s, and it's like, okay, and you might be in your 90s or in your 80s, and you're going, okay, well, I can't pick this person up anymore. You know, so being able to know what's available, you know, what does the MAC Center provide? You know, that kind of thing. Who can utilize their services and all that good stuff. That way people can start planning ahead for the future, like you just said.
Right.
You know, so
Right. No, absolutely. That's you know, 30 years down the road, and you plan for not just
it comes
when I'm
quick,
not
though.
around. Yeah, no, and certainly seeing how fast time passes, or how much faster it passes as you get older, right?
Yeah.
And those are the types of things, and with an increase in the number of folks that may be needing these services, right? Probably because we have better ways to diagnose things like autism that previously weren't being diagnosed.
Yeah.
And whatever else there may be, but the reality is that there's an increasing population of children with special needs, and I think we're going to have to, as a society, plan for that, because the level of needs that we currently have, or what we're providing, is going to have to scale up with that.
Yeah.
And I you know, you when you hear about, you know, or I hear about, you know, cuts to programs that are important for, you know, this segment of our population, it's obviously concerning. So,
Yeah.
So,
Let me ask you this, like, and this is just me asking because you're a smart guy and I'm super naive to things.
so I think we're all smart in our own areas.
Well,
and
you
naive
got
in our
more
own ways.
exposure
Yeah.
too, so like you see the cutbacks and you see like the government shutdown and all that good stuff. And there's some things where it's like, okay, you know, Mr. Brown's a retired military guy. He's probably not getting his check. At some point, it'll all kick in. He'll get his check, you know, and back pay or whatever. But I feel like, and this is just me thinking sometimes on my own. I really haven't said this to anybody, but I feel like there's certain times in my life, and this is a small scale, right? Where it's like, okay, I can't depend on so and so. So how do I fix that, right? I become more self-sufficient. And how do I do that? And at what scale? And so I start to think of like community-wise. Like, I get it's different now. Things are more expensive. You know, the population's grown, advancements in technology. But when I think back growing up in George West in the 80s, like I told you, everybody was broke. you know? So I would joke with people and I say, George works on favors, right? Somebody might be a mechanic. You know, Dad was always butchering meat, and we were always giving meat to people. So somebody might come work on Dad's car, or he'd give him some deer. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of what we were doing, but it was on a very small scale. And I get you can't do that in Houston, right? But there's times where I sit there and go, okay, what can be different in our community? Whether it's on, I don't know, maybe it's another entity that gets involved. Is it the churches, or what can be done differently? I know we have food banks. I know we have things like that nature, but I feel like a lot of times we have a more of a population in need than what those kind of entities can provide. And so sometimes I sit there and I go, well, is it a mindset? Is it a mindset of, hey, we need to start being more self-sufficient as a city, you know, or as a state? How does that, I often think about, how does that work? How do we take somebody who's not very consistent out of the equation so we can have more consistency? You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that there's an answer for that. I mean, we're probably not going to answer right now. It's just something that's been in my brain lately where I go, you know, okay, there's people in need, there's people who are hungry. One thing that's been blowing my mind, man, and this is just a tangent. I know we're way off of where we started, but, you know, I think the food bank allows some wild game now, and which I think is great. I love wild game. And but one thing that I've always kind of just blown my mind, and I get that pigs are dirty and all that good stuff, but I've often thought, man, we have a wild pig problem and we have a hunger problem. Like, how do we connect those dots? You know what I'm saying? I grew up in a small town, and I tell everybody, wild pigs probably, if I had to pick one meat for the rest of my life, it'd probably be a wild hog, you know? And so people go, oh, that's gross. But it's kind of like, okay, here's a food source, and we're not connecting those dots. You know, and I mean, simple things like that, or maybe they're not quite so simple, but I think about things like that, and it's like, how can we adjust things? How can, you know, we talked a minute ago about, you know, Mac Center and Morgan's Wonderland, Kinetic Kids, and it's like there was this need in San Antonio, and I feel like San Antonio's really kind of stepped up to the plate. And it's like, well, what other needs can we step up to the plate in, you know? Right. And I don't know, I just kind of went off on a tangent, but that's just been something that's been in my brain, you know, and a lot of times it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we be more resourceful and more independent on a local level, you know, like we have been with the special needs community? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a very complex question that probably doesn't have a simple answer. But, you know, I think and leaving aside the politics of it, because I don't think that gets us anywhere, but the reality is that there's a widening gap, which I feel different than maybe when I was growing up in Del Rio. And there are aspects to that experience similar to George West, where we were very self-sufficient. There's never a lack of game, you know, venison and, you know, you name it. But the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots is probably historically it's widening, and some would argue has never been a bigger divide between that. And there's folks that are just living different realities on that. And it's, I mean, you're right about the local need, being able to, you take, Gordon Hartman was the one that is the, Morgan's Wonderland. What is there there's clearly not going to be a Morgan's Wonderland without him, but is there anything similar? Probably not. So he's a visionary, right? Yeah. I mean, he's just, now, while I think it's great, and obviously we're very fortunate to have folks like that in our community, there has to be a local, state, and federal component to meeting that need, right? I mean, I think for a lot of different reasons, there has to be a integrated approach that addresses it, because there are different aspects to meeting the need. It's not just food, but it's medical care. Sure. It's housing. It's so many different things that not every level of government is equipped to assist with, right? And so, wherever someone is on the political spectrum, it doesn't matter. What we cannot dispute is that, we have to agree on what common objectives are, and the whole point of this United States of America is that we be united, and we may not always agree, and we usually don't, on how to get certain things done, but we should still be able to agree on what we're trying to do here, right? Yeah. And in providing for the basic needs of our most vulnerable, if that's not something that everybody can agree on, then I worry about things. But I think what you're seeing though is that security blanket, right? That when you have a government shutdown and you have, military benefits, you name it, then at that point it's kind of like, you're a child living in a house and the parents aren't providing anymore. It's like, what? You're my provider. And some people are in that position, right, where they are relying on it. And without, I think, there are some situations like we talked about earlier. You can always find examples of abuse in any situation, right? But those shouldn't shape the narrative.
Sure.
And because I think, it's like the 80-20 rule, right? Focus on the 80, not the 20. And there are folks in our country, and it's not just special needs, it's others, our elderly, our sick, that as Americans, we have to be able to provide for. And if we're not, then we're failing, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's what's scary about things like a government shutdown, is that we're not meeting those needs temporarily. But those are things that I don't know, I just should never be subject to any type of political negotiation or anything like that. But it's a scary thing. I think, but I see where what you're saying about on the sufficiency, on self-sufficiency and things like that. I mean, I think with a similar background in terms of the Mexicano side, that you tackle the issue, you find a way, right?
Yeah.
It's like you find a way, and that's what I think. One of the threats to my line of work as a personal injury attorney has always been tort reform, and Texas has passed waves of it.
What is that exactly?
Tort reform is where they pass laws to limit the ability of people to recover, that have been suffered some form of negligence and injury. The biggest example of tort reform would be, two things. One was in the 90s, workers' comp. They reformed that, and they changed it to what it is now, which is very difficult for folks that have suffered an on-the-job injury where the employer has workers' compensation. They have to go through the workers' compensation system, which has, they've got their own doctors, and we have to sometimes deal with that in what I do, because if they were hurt on the job and it's a workers' comp claim, we're not going after their employer. You can't sue your employer if they have workers' comp, right? But sometimes there'll be a third party involved, so we'll go after the third party, but our client is treating through workers' comp, and
What is that third party? Like
a third party could be like a construction site, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So you got multiple contractors at a construction site, or it could be on the road. Like you could have a driver who's taking a load and gets broadsided by another truck, and so we're going after them. But the treatment, since he was on the job, is going through workers' comp.
Oh.
And so, it's very, I would say, to put it lightly, limited. And you've got doctors. The reimbursement rates aren't very good.
Yeah, let me tell you this. My mom fell. My mom's been a mess this year. About 7 or 8 months ago, she fell, broke her hip. Mm-hmm. And it blew my mind, because she had surgery. She happened on Wednesday night. Thursday, she had surgery. She was out of the hospital on Sunday. Before she went to the rehab center in Corpus, she already had an exit date, which was like 12 days. And for me, I sit there and go, well, hang on. She just got a surgery. She's 64, and she already has an exit date from rehab. She hasn't even gone to rehab. Like, how do we know that she's ready to leave rehab?
Yeah.
So I guess that's something similar that you guys run into as well.
And that's a our healthcare system, right? And questions about how our U.S. healthcare system is set up with private insurance and Medicare and Medicaid and the rules and regulations in place, right? It's a whole it's a whole nother.
So do you guys have like a department dedicated to something like that?
Well, we do. So a lot of what we do is tracking in medical care and making sure our clients get medical care. But it's a different situation because, so what a lot of people do, going back to I'll close that tort reform question real quick, is, we had workers' comp, which was, changed in the 90s. And then you had the next big movement for tort reform was in 2002, 2003, which was medical malpractice tort reform. And where they put in limits, they cap non-economic damages at $250,000 regardless of the injury. And the argument for that was that there were runaway juries and verdicts, and it was scaring off doctors, and it was affecting our health care because people were afraid to come to Texas because doctors would get sued. And that was the solution, right? And it worked in the sense that you've got very few lawyers now that do medical malpractice because of the tort reform, because of the caps.
But is that a good thing? Because if there is medical malpractice,
that's where I was going. And look, just like lawyers, doctors, 80-20. You've got some good ones, and you've got some great ones, and you've got some bad ones. And what that arbitrary cap of $250,000 for non-economic damages is just so arbitrary.
What is non-economic damage?
Economic damages are things like medical bills, things on paper that you can put numbers to, right?
Okay. So basically saying this is they may waive your fee because there was a lawsuit, but this is what you can make at max.
For like pain and suffering.
Right,
for
pain and
mental
suffering.
anguish.
Gotcha.
Yes. So, the other, and with these medical malpractice cases, you have to have, on top of that, expert reports filed within 3 months of the lawsuit, and have multiple reports, and then they're going to get challenged, and it's quite a bit. And so you look at how much it costs. People don't realize, like when we hire experts, which we do in our cases, what it costs to hire an expert.
Yeah.
And so if you look at a medical malpractice case, with the experts alone, like you're already going to have to spend, usually at a minimum, probably like $50,000, but probably more, right? And then you're talking about a cap of $250,000 for non-economic damages. And and you can do the math on that and figure out, like, wow, that's really hard for a law firm, a lawyer to be incentivized to take on those types of cases. And on top of that, there's a likelihood that it's going to end up, it could get dismissed because the bar is very high for those cases. Now, again, from a public policy standpoint, I think the idea that there's a Seventh Amendment, right? That I'm obviously a big proponent of, right? The right to trial by jury. Let a jury decide. Let 12 strangers, people decide what ultimately the outcome should be based on justice, right? The idea that you should have some limitation on what they can decide, I don't agree with, but I see where their line of thinking was. I don't think the way they went about it is fair, and I think it's actually dangerous, and it has been, and
Sure.
We've got it's allowed, it's brought in some of the doctors you don't want to be operating or touching patients in Texas.
Yeah.
The number of calls that we get from people on medical malpractice cases, because again, we don't do them. There's very few lawyers that do. I mean, you hear some really, really bad stories, and we work with one or two law firms that we recommend whenever we hear a case that gets called in that the damages justify, I think, having them look at it. But it's like one out of I don't even say 1 out of 1,000. It's like 1 out of 10,000 cases they'll take because of how difficult it is.
Wow,
and it's so bad that, like, I mean, as an example, like, the only way to get around it is by having economic damages, which are medical bills in the past, medical bills in the future, or lost wages or loss of earning capacity. And just to put this into perspective,
that's got to be difficult to prove too, right? Because who's to say what your earning capacity is going to be, right?
When you're a baby, when you're a newborn,
right?
And we've had more than a few cases called in of birth injuries, but they can't prove how much that baby would have made,
right?
And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking and it's tough. The number of times I have to explain that to people, is really difficult. And what you see is, on the doctor's side, their insurance rates haven't really come down that much, and so yeah, that's what tort reform is. That's the most extreme example, I think. But they tried to do it again last year, and it failed, thankfully. And but they've slowly.
So is it going to get more stringent?
Yeah, last year the bill that they had filed, the Texans for Lawsuit Reform, they were trying to take what medical malpractice does to limit and make it for all personal injury cases, not just medical malpractice. And over the last 20 years, it's like kind of like a death by 1,000 needles, right? Like, or paper cuts rather. Is little changes to the law that over time just add up and make it really, really hard.
So who's behind those tort reform changes? Proposing those?
The insurance industry.
Okay.
Insurance industry, and then you've also got the trucking industry as well, right? And again, like I said, what you see is the sensational headlines, right? And some of my colleagues don't make it easier by some of the sensational advertising that you sometimes see.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. But the reality is, like, if you talk to folks, in the trenches, or if you have someone who's been personally affected, that's been a common conversation I've had over my time as a trial lawyer, where you have to explain, not on the medical malpractice stuff, but on some of the other technical changes that, like I said, slowly make it more and more difficult. Folks are like, oh, I just heard about the hot coffee case in McDonald's. I heard about this lady, and
wasn't there Bill Miller ones too? I think
that was here. That was recent. But they used that. There's a lot about that hot coffee case, the McDonald's one, that people don't know about, how bad those burns were, and how much they knew before that this was eventually going to happen. But it was an economic decision, right? Yeah. And so ultimately, where it falls is like, okay, if we all believe that in the Seventh Amendment, then shouldn't we just let a jury decide ultimately, right? And
is there a reason not to do that on somebody's side? I mean, other than, hey, we probably won't win that case, so let's not go that route. But is there another reason? Is it expensive to have a trial by jury case?
Yeah, the expenses are always. I mean, going to trial is always going to be. It's never cheap, right? And there are considerations. There's a reason why most cases get resolved out of court or before they get to court, right, or trial, because once a lawsuit is filed, you go through what's called. This is on the civil side. You go through what's called the discovery process, which is, we send requests for information. This includes documents, written interrogatories, which is like deposition testimony, but in writing form. Both sides do that for a period of months, sometimes longer, depending on how voluminous the documents are. And then you go through depositions, which are giving, sitting in a conference room like this, taking an oath with a court reporter and lawyers asking you questions. You're not in a courtroom, but you've testified under oath so that the parties now know what the testimony is going to be if you go to trial, right? And it can be used at trial. And so the courts mandate that before you go to trial, you have to go to what's called a mediation. And sometimes it doesn't get resolved at mediation, sometimes it does, sometimes it gets a second mediation or a third mediation, and then sometimes, it doesn't work. But the whole point is when you have lawyers that know what they're doing, they can sort of, almost like handicap a case to where here's where we think this case would fit, right, in this range. And it's somewhere in that on the two sides where cases sometimes get resolved. But ultimately, if it doesn't work, then you've got 12 people that, get called up for jury duty who listen to both sides and make a decision. And that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And what tort reform does is it
that seems
makes
more
a decision.
fair.
That's what it was supposed to be. That's what our founders thought is how to decide the outcomes of civil disputes.
Yeah.
Not through legislative, efforts and bills and laws that restrict things, where you've got, special interest money going into that. And now it's on both sides. I mean, that's been a war that's been waged for quite a while on the tort reform side. And so as trial lawyers, we have our own battle that we try to counter. It's a much smaller budget, but, and this is really, I think, to the credit of a lot of legislators now, where traditionally it was a very partisan thing, right? It was Republicans were always against trial lawyers, and trial lawyers were always for Democrats, and it was always a red-blue thing. Now, it's interesting. The political landscape has kind of shifted a little bit, not a little bit, a lot, where you have folks on the right that are truly believe in limited government and believe in sticking to the Constitution and the rights of the people. And so it's now a message that resonates on both sides, and that's really what allowed us to get past what just happened this past session, where it passed the Senate, went to the House, it got modified in a committee, passed the House, but then they couldn't agree on some final language, and it just ended up dying. But they're coming back already, so we'll see. But yeah, it's interesting because it's these insurance companies have never been making more money than they're making right now. There's
Sure.
It's not like they're hurting or anything. And at the end of the day, I mean, when your argument is we shouldn't let a jury decide, it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that kind of tells you what their I guess stance is.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because like a lot of people aren't going to. I think when you get hurt and when you're injured, whether it's hot coffee or an 18-wheeler accident or a slip and fall, like your priority needs to be taking care of whoever that happened to, or yourself, or if there's a death involved, there's priorities, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's better to do nothing than to do something. If there's a potential for a lawsuit and you don't know that till you acquire a lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. What are some things that folks probably should or shouldn't do immediately after an incident where there might be a potential for a lawsuit to take place? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times I don't think people get in a bad wreck and then go, I'm gonna sue that person. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're in an ambulance and they're trying to save their life.
Right.
But it's like, what can folks do that kind of helps their lawyer help them better, I guess, right, immediately after an accident or an incident?
No, good question. So I think first, when we say sue, a lot of times when we represent folks, especially in car crashes, whether they're 18-wheelers, commercial vehicles or not, just personal vehicles, the effort is always made by the lawyer and law firm to try to resolve it without a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. That's always the goal. Like it's time-wise more efficient and cost-wise.
On a percentage rate, how often does that happen?
Probably and this is just I'm estimating here that probably 40% have to go to litigation, maybe
Because it's expensive for both sides.
It is. Although, if you're an insurance company like you, billions of dollars, it does. It's not as big an expense than it is for an individual, right? Now we're fronting the expenses, obviously, but they add up and they come out of that person's recovery. And so
I don't want to skip the question, but I don't want to forget this part. So I'm just going to say it, but you don't have to answer right now. Like, how do you compete against that? But I mean, let's answer the first one first. But that's super interesting because, like, how does George Salinas compete against Blue Cross,
or USA, or I won't call them, anyone,
a large
Geico
insurance company,
or one of these big, well, we know what needs to be done that will maximize the value of the case, right? You could go and spend an unlimited budget if you really wanted to on anything, but the reality is you should only be doing that you should only be making expenses that are going to increase the likelihood that your client's going to recover or the amount that they can recover, right? And there are very specific examples. And for example, with like car wrecks, there are some where you don't need to hire an accident reconstructionist because it's based on the police report, maybe it was on camera, you can, and even within accident reconstructionists, there's a pretty broad spectrum on, the bells and whistles you can go with, right? You can get somebody that's retired DPS and, maybe spend, I don't know, say $5,000 on that. Or you can hire an engineering firm that does full-blown animation and reconstruction and, that's $100,000, right? So first what we do is you look at is, what is the recovery like what does it look like for the client? It's based on two things. One is level of injury, right? There's again, a broad spectrum on that. If a back issue versus, and even within that's a broad spectrum. A back issue can be a back sprain that they got therapy on, an MRI, and maybe had like an injection, versus somebody that has to go and have surgery that can't work anymore and that had multiple surgeries. I've seen that, and so you look at what that person's suffering is, what their damage is, but then you also have to look at what is the potential, what is the recovery source? And that's challenging. In Texas, it's not set up to where we can require the insurance company to tell us how much insurance they have. We know what the minimum is in Texas. It's $30,000, right? And we know that some insurance companies only sell that amount. They only sell minimum policies. So if we see one of those insurance companies that only sells a $30,000 insurance policy, and we have a client that was, airlifed, there's not a lot we can do there, and it's a common source of frustration for folks. So
it's important for the individual to know what kind of policy they have.
Absolutely. Well, it's important for two things. One is to know what's on the other side, but the only way we can do that in Texas is to file the lawsuit. Once you file a lawsuit, then the insurance company is required to disclose how much insurance they have.
Oh, okay.
Some we already know it's going to be a minimum, so it doesn't matter whether you file or not. I'm not going to name names, but we probably know who the lower quality insurance companies are. There are others that
they're in a strip mall.
That may be true. There are others that sell a wide variety of policy limit cases, and so we don't know, right? And then there are commercial insurance companies. So when we have tractor trailers and other types of vehicles, or that commercial vehicles, or sometimes delivery vehicles, where that they or Ubers as an example, where we know that they're going to have at least $1 million, for example. What people can do to protect themselves, I always recommend, it's just, you wish sometimes people heard this before the accident and not after, but is to have uninsured underinsured coverage. Because then, you also got a large percentage of folks that don't have insurance. And so, it's tough when you have to tell folks that there's either only $30,000 in insurance, despite the fact that you lost a limb or something. Or there's no insurance. none at all. And there's not much you can do. And, can I sue the individual? If you think you're going to sue an individual and then get them to pay money when they weren't paying for insurance, and you can just file for bankruptcy if you're the defendant and basically get out of it. So those are always difficult situations. And so that's why I always recommend that folks have a good, relative to the benefit, the expense is low in my opinion for having that as a safety net if you ever need it. Hopefully you don't, but it's good to have. Going back to,
and that's important because, I think about myself. I even told Nina the other day, we were talking about the house insurance. I don't know what we have. We bought the house. I needed insurance. I called State Farm in Beeville. I said, hey, we just bought a house. I need insurance. Okay, here you go. And that was it. I don't know what we're covered for. And then when you think about vehicle insurance, people look at insurance and they want to pay the least amount possible because it's insurance. I don't need it unless I need it, right? And so it's kind of like, well, you got to take into consideration, like you said, running into somebody who doesn't have enough coverage or no coverage at all. A big one was my buddy's house when it burned down. He bought the house at $70,000. 12, 15 years later, it was worth $400,000. Well, when his house burned down, all the bank wanted to give him was $170,000. But it was going to cost $400,000 to rebuild it. And I mean, those are things that we don't think. You get insurance. I got insurance. I don't think about it.
Right.
It's huge.
It's huge. And the likelihood. I mean, it's just you don't ever want to hear about somebody being involved in a crash, but with all of us probably being at the wheel every day of the week. The odds are that at some point you're going to be in a situation where you're going to need it.
Hey, and let's be honest, these construction zones aren't helping.
No, that definitely. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of incidents coming from that, and folks
getting frustrated and taking shortcuts and cutting people off,
right, and not knowing how to safely navigate through some of those areas. It's bad. But yeah, but that's something that folks can do that I think is important and relative, like I said, relative to it's I think surprising for some folks to hear when they ask, like, well, how much more would it add to my premium? It's well worth it.
Yeah.
So I always recommend that, and we try to see what we can do to get things resolved for folks without having to file the lawsuit. But unfortunately, insurance companies, they go through periods where, from up above, right, they're going to be very aggressive on things. And we know that this insurance company has changed, their mandate coming up to deny everything and lowball everything. So we're litigating all of our cases against that insurance company. And then sometimes where they're just trying to close a bunch of claims. And then, all of a sudden you get calls from adjusters left and right, trying to get things resolved. So, it shifts. I mean, at the end of the day, it's it's a human component. It's a human connection, right? And one of the things that I have to explain a lot to folks is the insurance company isn't looking at that, right?
Sure.
They're looking at numbers. These are all algorithms. Ultimately, they're
literally looking at numbers.
Mm-hmm. No, seriously, yeah, it is. And
you've got to make eye contact with somebody that's going through a very traumatic thing that's happened in their lives. So.
Exactly. And then explain to them, well, why aren't they taking this into consideration, right? Well, because they have a system, a program that they input, these codes into, and it tells them what they can offer, and it doesn't consider things like, not being able to hold your 2-year-old up anymore, as an example. But that's where the jury comes in. Right. Yeah. That's why it's important to have that in place to let that be the final decision. So,
how do you approach talking to a client that you're not going to be able to help?
It's tough. It's tough, and it's always I having to explain, like, look, and there's different reasons sometimes for that, right? Sometimes, I mean, I mentioned one of them earlier. There's no insurance, and there's just no, you're digging a deeper hole if you do anything else at that point. Other times it's like I said, it's the law, right? That we talked about tort reform. We talked about we can't change the law. We have to work within the framework,
Right.
and I will never. And I think folks appreciate it. I've said many times, look, I'm not doing what I'm sworn to do and why I'm doing it if I'm going to sit here and tell you what you want to hear and not what you need to hear. It's like a doctor, right? Do you want the doctor that's just feeding you what you want to hear to make you feel good, or do you want the doctor who's going to tell you what's going on and why it's going on and what's best for you? And yeah, there are some situations where, for different reasons, the solution or the answer or what I think is best does not involve moving forward. Okay. But I'm going to explain that or people in my office, right? It's impossible for me to tell everything when that happens, but that's where the empathy comes in, right? That's where the empathy comes in. And I think, again, it doesn't always, I mean, it doesn't remedy the situation, obviously, but it at least makes people feel better that they know someone was looking out for them and telling them what's going on and why it's going on, and despite wanting, if it was just a question of wanting to help,
sure,
we'd sign up everything,
And reality sucks in some cases, and it's, I think when you have a lawyer or you have whatever, somebody on your side who's trying to advocate for you, when they beat around the bush, it just prolongs that, and it makes the inevitable that much more painful. Mm-hmm. When you can give them the truth and you can make it easy to understand, it's not easy to digest, but it's a lot easier than if it was prolonged, because I think a lot of times people get hopeful that they're going to be somehow compensated or made whole. And hope's the biggest thing, right? When you lose it, it's way worse.
Right.
When you never had it, it's a little more palatable, right?
Right.
But
I think that's what we have to do, right? Is provide a realistic expectation of what lies ahead. And look, sometimes, that is, it's impossible to determine or to measure what that is going to look like in a year. Mm-hmm. But there are certain key elements on cases that are ingredients that you need to be able to get there. And cases have that. And for those that do, then, you build that case up. And once you get to that point, then you're in a better position to answer those questions. And so sometimes the answer to some questions is, I can't tell you the answer to that right now.
Yeah.
I can tell you when we get there. But if anyone's telling you the answer to that, they're not doing you a favor. Right?
Yeah.
And so, it's a willingness to be able to be straightforward with clients, with people, that sometimes the answer is not yet known. But if we're going forward with them, it's for a reason. I mean, we're
sure,
obviously it's a business, right? I mean, we're not putting in the resources that we're putting in unless we think that we're going to be able to recover for them.
I don't want to harp too much on money, but you said earlier, and is it always the case where you get paid if you win?
Right.
You don't get paid if you don't win.
Correct.
So that's tricky for a business, because at the end of the day, it's a business. And if you decide, or if you and your team decide, hey, this is a case we're going to take on, mm-hmm. right? You spend a lot of money on experts. You spend a lot of money just in staff and putting time toward this case. And you've got several cases, right? It doesn't win. You don't charge the client. So all that's out of pocket. The specialists, the engineers, afterward care, whether it was a doctor or it was a therapist or it was a second opinion, all that's out of pocket from you guys?
Right. The experts part, yes. Oof. Yes. And so, fortunately, we don't, we've not, so there are times where there's not enough information to really know, there's more information that needs to be obtained. But we'll represent for investigatory purposes.
Well, I mean, even that costs money, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, even any time, and this, again, people need to remember, yes, there is the victim and they're the priority, but you still got to pay somebody to go look something up. You still have to pay somebody to run across town to acquire whatever they need to acquire. Mm-hmm. Like, that's coming at us somewhere.
Right.
And that's your firm fitting that bill.
Right.
So, that's scary.
Yeah. Well, that's where the having a team in place, it's experience that, there's just sometimes you're just not going to know with certainty, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times. And our job is to move as quickly as possible to get that evidence that we need to make an informed decision. And we'll, you tell people on the front end in those situations that, look, we may have to have a conversation in 6 weeks based on what we uncover on whether the case is viable or not for you. Okay. And again, this generally speaking, especially when it comes to on the road stuff, we have a lot of information on the front end to be able to make a decision that, number one, your client wasn't at fault, because that's what it all boils down to.
Yeah.
You had asked a question earlier. It's like, how does someone know whether to hire a lawyer? If you're hurt as a result of somebody else's negligence, there you go. That's it, right? We sometimes get calls, or I'll get calls from friends that are like, I got into an accident. I'm just have some questions. Yeah, that's fine. You don't just because you were in an accident doesn't mean you need a lawyer. And if you're it's about the property damage, I would never recommend somebody hire a lawyer for that. I mean, it's typically more straightforward, the property damage part, because remember, the property damage claim, separate from the bodily injury claim, is it's pure economics, right? It's the cost to repair the vehicle or the replacement of the vehicle. There is room for some disagreement in there, but generally speaking, it's as black and white as you can get in a claim, right? Bodily injury is different, right? Because a bodily injury claim is made up of several different components. I've mentioned there's economic and non-economic, and those are generally the two big umbrellas that everything else falls underneath. So for the economic, you've got your medical bills, your lost wages, any loss of earning capacity in the future. On your non-economic, you have your physical pain, mental anguish, physical impairment, physical disfigurement. Those are typically the ones that fall under that. There's no Kelly Blue Book for that, right? And so that's when I tell folks, that's when you need a lawyer, because this is not a black and white thing. And of course, their objective is to pay you as little as possible, right? Yeah. And one of the big challenges that doesn't get talked about a lot, because you don't realize it until you're in the situation, is how hard it is to get medical care after you've been in an accident from the normal channels that people get medical care. Okay. And I'm not talking about hospitals. Like some people, you go to a hospital, they have to see you, right? They don't have a choice. If you go to a hospital, whether or not you have insurance, it's an emergency room, they have to take you in, and you're going to walk out with a huge bill. But after that, where do you normally go? And doctors have the ability to decide who they will see and won't see within certain safeguards, obviously.
Because the doctors, and I don't know if it's always been this, but they're separate from the hospital.
Right.
It's like it's almost like having a fitness trainer, right? He may work out of this gym, but he's an independent contractor kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's doctors are similar, right? Like,
well, they have doctors that work in the hospital, that work for the hospital in groups and things like that. And then you have, doctors that are, right, they're outside the hospital setting, and they have private practices and things like that. So, or part of larger networks. Mm-hmm. Okay. Normally what would happen is somebody gets into a crash, if, they're that day, they're going to go and get seen by either going to a hospital or go to like an emergency clinic, like a urgent care or something like that, right? The question is there are some injuries where they're trauma, right? Like they're going to SAMC and level 5 type stuff. Sure. They're going to be in there for a while. I'm not talking about that. the majority of cases that I think we see when it comes to people getting hurt in crashes are spinal injuries, right? Neck and back. And so that, where do you go to get treated for that? Because if you go to your family doctor, they're not generally set up or equipped to treat spinal injuries, right? And then they may prescribe you some anti-inflammatories and tell you to come back in 6 months or 3 months, or maybe order an x-ray, which generally speaking, like x-rays, broken bones, for spinal injuries, like broken bones aren't normally the issue, it's disc, right? So you need an MRI. But the problem though is that, doctors know that if they treat a patient who's been involved in a crash and they were not at fault, then there is a high chance that that person is filing a claim against the insurance company, right? And as a result of that, the insurance company is obviously they're going to do what they're going to, fight the claim, but that they will ultimately send subpoenas, send requests for medical records and bills and anything and everything in the patient file for that patient that their staff is going to have to respond to and take time. And on top of that, they're going to potentially have to testify and get subpoenaed and appear at a deposition or at a courthouse.
It's a lot.
Yeah. You're talking about that, so all of a sudden, like he's stepping out of his clinic.
Sure.
And spending an entire day at the courthouse, right? This patient, let's say, has Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? So their reimbursement doesn't change for that. So I think doctors do which I don't blame them for. It's just like when you go to a doctor's office, sometimes you'll see, have you been in a crash? Have you been in an accident? And if you put yes, they'll tell you, we don't treat people in accidents because they don't want to get involved in that, right? And so there over the years of you'll find some exceptions sometimes, but I've represented doctors. Actually, it's funny because so as a result, we have to have doctors that are willing to, if needed, testify for our clients. Because here's the thing: if you don't have a doctor testifying for your client, then you don't have evidence that that injury was from the crash. Your client's testimony is not they're not an expert. So they can say, I was in a crash, this happened, and it started hurting, and it's been hurting since, and I did all of this treatment. You still need a medical expert to come in, the treating expert, and say, I treated them, this is what I did, and based on everything that I see, this was from the crash, right? If that's the case, obviously.
So if you're in a wreck, and the majority of issues people have is going to be their neck or their back. I've been in a fender bender, and it didn't turn out terrible, but they were like, do you want to see an ambulance? And I was like, no, I'm fine. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it just wasn't being sore. But I remember a couple of days later, man, I was sore for a while. Is it in people's best interest to be seen immediately? Or is it kind of like, hey, that's not necessary, we can look at it later kind of thing? Or is it best to get looked at right away?
So I always say, if there's, and what you just said is in my experience, accurate for a lot of folks. At the scene, adrenaline's kicked in. They've, many times are like, thank God it wasn't worse, that kind of thing. They're focusing on triaging the situation. How am I going to get to where I'm going? Who do I need to call?
Yeah.
There's so many things going on, and you a lot of times won't feel it until the next day or 48 hours later, right? But whenever that is, it's important for it to be documented because insurance companies fight these claims a lot of different ways. One of the most common tactics they use is what we call a gap in treatment. So, let's say you got into that accident, you didn't feel anything at the scene, you turned down an ambulance, which most people do unless there's blood and broken bones, anything traumatic. You waited a month later until you're like, I better go get seen because this is getting worse. Whoever that is on the other side, on the insurance company side, is going to say, wait a minute, you didn't see a doctor for 30 days. Yeah, which outside of that realm, it's like, that's not a lot of time. That's
No.
not bad.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised. In our world, 30 days, oh, what happened in that 30 days?
Yeah.
Because if you were hurt, you would have gone right away. And you know how many experts I've cross-examined, doctors that get hired by insurance companies that use that no pain at the scene, as no pain at the scene. Clearly this is either drummed up or caused by something else. And so that's always an easy way to attack them. But I always recommend just get seen by somebody, right? Even if it's an urgent care. But that's always not that's not the long-term solution, right? That's just a triage. That's just a documentation, making sure nothing's broken. And then the hard part is finding a medical provider, a doctor that's going to see that patient under the circumstances where there's a claim involved, right? And which is why you have this thing about it's doctors and and lawyers drumming up these claims and all of this. If we didn't have the burden of proof, if we didn't have to have medical testimony from doctors to be able to prove that the injury, even though we know it was caused by this wreck, then it wouldn't be an issue, right? But we have to, and so for the doctors, right? If you're a doctor and you're going to have to do all of this extra work, right? Not just treat, but you're going to have subpoenas. You're going to have possibly have to go to court, spend time there, right? You're obviously, they're not a nonprofit. They're going to just say, okay, well, here's my full bill. This is what I bill, and send that, and that becomes part of what we send to the insurance company, and that's a whole other fight about whether the bill's too high and that kind of thing. But as I've explained to you, like they're having to wait to get paid until the case resolves, and there's a chance it may not get paid at all.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like you always hear about frivolous lawsuits, and it's kind of like, well, if I'm a lawyer, if I'm you, I would want to weed those out because I don't want to pay anything that's going to end up having to come out of pocket. Right. And if I think that somebody's coming to me and there's a little bit of fraud there, I'm not even going to touch it because when I turn on the lights, that costs money, right. And why would I dedicate any amount of resource to something that I feel is frivolous or there's some fraud there or, it just doesn't make sense,
right.
And now I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there's probably lawyer mills that sit there and go, we're gonna sue every case that comes through here, But if you're legitimately trying to do a good job and do a good service to your clients and run a profitable business, like you'd be very selective with what cases you take on.
Absolutely. Yeah. We do it's called in the legal term mechanism of injury, right? There has to be a mechanism of injury for us to be able to show that this caused that.
Yeah.
And even though there's a line, like, so there is the insurance world, they call them low impact cases, where maybe it's a rear end collision and there's not a lot of visible property damage, right? Insurance companies got very, very aggressive, starting with Allstate in the 90s. There's a book called From Good Hands to Boxing Gloves. And they just started, hiring biomechanic experts to give opinions on the amount of force that was involved and use studies to show that this amount of force could not have caused any type of injury to an individual. Now, some of this stuff is junk science, because like it's, no two people ever have the same injury sitting in the same seat. Right. There's so many variables involved.
Sure.
So many variables involved. And sure, it is.
Well, there's probably body type as well and all kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
Age.
Yes. And then there's, there's damage and the ways that cars are being, vehicles are being built now. Or you take somebody that's in a truck, I say you drive a truck, I drive a truck. I know I got rear-ended. I was in an F-250.
Yours is considerably nicer.
Oh, yeah, that's not. It's a Ford. I love Ford. But I was in an F-250 and I got rear-ended years ago, and there was not a lot of damage to my truck because I was in an F-250.
Yeah,
and
they're a lot heavier.
Yeah, but I felt it, And I felt it, and I've never been the same. And so I always remember that, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, we have to be very careful about if it was truly like somebody was backing out of a parking spot, and that's different than what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay? And so there's that, but yeah, it's just making sure you're getting it addressed. Because one thing about Texas, once you settle with the insurance company, you're done. Like you can't come back later. And so it's a big decision to sign on the dotted line. And one of the tactics that insurance companies have is to get to them first immediately after, when maybe the symptoms aren't even that bad, and say, here's $1,000, $2,500, just sign this release. And someone may feel like, oh, that was a little bit of a nagging pain, but it's not too bad. They take it. Sometimes we get calls from folks like, and they don't even have to sign. It can be verbal.
Yeah.
And I said,
really?
Yeah. It can be verbal, and they have a recording. It's like, you agree to take this money, as an exchange for a full and final release? Yes.
So literally no takebacks.
Yeah, exactly. No takebacks. Yeah. And
well, I think that was part of what I was asking earlier about, lawyers where the state comes down on them. Mm-hmm. It's like if you had a lawyer that said, hey, just sign the paperwork, and you find out later on he was not doing a good job, or he was doing things illegally, mm-hmm. Those people can't ever go back and sue that insurance company, even though the lawyer may have done something incorrectly or done something illegal.
Right.
Whether it was on their case or not, that's it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's some safeguards in place before they get to that point. Mm-hmm. One of which is they have to sign a release anytime the insurance companies, before they're ever going to send a check. Okay. Right? So they're going to have to see a document that lays out, incident, what they're agreeing to, and the amount of money that the insurance company is paying. Now, the key after that is what's called a disbursement, right? In that they should see a document from their lawyer that line items where all of that money is going, right?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and so, and
so your $2,500 is getting split up.
Well, I would never recommend. Yeah, $2,500 was the example of insurance companies calling people directly and saying, "Take $2,500 now."
Gotcha.
Yeah, and be done with it, right?
Gotcha.
But no, I mean, once you get a case resolved for a client, you've told them what the terms are. They should be signing off on a disbursement so that they understand how that, where the payments are going, right?
Is that negotiable? Like mm-hmm. if you call and say, "Hey, we won. This is how we're breaking up the money. These are our fees. This is how," and you give them an itemized list, I'm assuming, mm-hmm. "Hey, we hired the specialist. We got this. We did this." Is that something where, because now you're negotiating, I guess you're negotiating, I don't know if I call it negotiation, but now you're talking directly to the client, mm-hmm. and now, hey, we're got to sort out how we're breaking this money out. Or is that something that happens early on where you say, hey, regardless of what we win, this percentage is going here, this percentage is going there. Right. This typically runs this. It might be plus or minus, $5,000. Right. Do they kind of get that early on?
Yeah. So every case is different. But to answer your question on the fees, the fees are set at the beginning so that they understand exactly what they are. Right. Gotcha. And so it's always a percentage. Now, what's key is that, other than when the insurance company just says, "This is all we have in insurance." When you're talking to a client, and sometimes we're not recommending that you have to present them an offer, and many times it's like, I got to present this to you, but I don't recommend you take it, and here's why. Okay, in these situations where we are recommending it, we're breaking all of that information down so that they're not seeing that for the first time in that document, right? So the idea is you don't want there to be any surprises. You want them to know what they're agreeing to and where they stand, and you should have already had that conversation with that client. And so, again, the only exception being sometimes when there's a limited amount of insurance and you have to figure it out. And sometimes we have to go and we don't recover more than our clients, right? And that's just my preference. And so the other situations are sometimes where you have to then talk to the doctors, like, this was a situation due to this factor or that factor. So I need you to, reduce your bill for the client. And so, yeah, it's always a fluid situation. There's no,
I'm sure you get pushback on that, but is that something that happens regular where doctors kind of expect, or the doctors have seen that several times and they know that's part of what happens?
Right. Because every case is different. There's the length of time that the case had to take to get to resolution, right? The amount of time it required from them, the amount of insurance that was available or not. Look, they're running a business, right? What our concern is with doctors is to make sure that whatever the bill amount is, like that it's what's considered a reasonable amount. Like, we were talking about tort reform. One of the components of the bill that didn't pass was to limit what doctors could charge as a multiple of Medicare. It was like 1.5, I believe, of what Medicare would have paid, which was intentionally designed to erase doctors from the equation by saying, what? I'm going to have to wait to get paid, and the most I'm ever going to get paid is 1.5 times Medicare. If I do, and I'm gonna have to go testify,
So that's almost like trying to rig the game,
right? Exactly, and so that was
if there's nobody to testify against us,
and nobody to provide treatment, but the argument for them is like, oh well, they've got health insurance. Yeah, they have health insurance, but they can't go to their family doc because they don't want to touch anybody that's been in a wreck.
Yeah,
and so it's it's crazy. I'll give you I've represented, several doctors before that have been in crashes, and, most of them are always like, oh, I'll, you don't need to worry about on the medical helping me get to find doctors that'll treat me because I'm a doctor. I'm going to call, Dr. So-and-so, a friend of mine. And I said, okay, let me know how that goes. Sure enough, they called back they don't want to touch me because I've been in a wreck.
Well, we might be friends, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to your business, and this is another thing that people like to think, well, a lot of people don't put themselves in other people's shoes. Even when you're the one who is injured, you still got to put yourself in people's shoes, right? And if I can't get upset with you because if this isn't something that you do, you're still responsible for your practice. You're still responsible for the people that work there. You've got responsibilities outside of my case,
right?
And so I can get where a doctor goes, we're buddies, but we're friends, man. But I still have people to take care of, and we don't do that thing, So that's interesting.
Well, and it's also interesting that, I've had clients that are doctors who don't even know where to go for that type of treatment, because it's like,
so rare.
Unless you've dealt with for example, a neck or back injury before. Most people, and some of our clients will go to a chiropractor, and then those help. And like I said, there's a broad range of injuries, and then within injuries, severity of injuries, right? And so, but most people, even doctors, don't know where to turn to after something like that and where to go and get treatment, right? Because it's just not your normal. I have a cold, so I'm going to call my family physician up, And so I think the tactic that I think they're going to try again to limit what they can, those doctors that do provide those services in these types of situations with all the obligations that come with it, by cutting off what they can get paid for the services that they provide, is how they're trying to disincentivize people from filing claims or just not reduce the number of doctors that can actually help them in those situations, right? And so, it's a number of people that I've sat across from me on the desk have been like, I never thought I was one of those that would ever file a claim, and I thought that everybody else was just like, trying to rig the system or thought it was a lottery ticket, and then it happened to me, and I'm like, it changes perspective, sure. Right? It's perspective, and it happens to them or it happens to a family member, and there's just so much beneath the surface that goes into it that a lot of people don't realize. It's not about these billboards and the big numbers and all of that. That's what you see when you're driving down the road, right? And I admit, it's not a good look for us. And but when it hits home, when it impacts people, and they see what they're up against, the way the system works, and what's really happening, it's eye opening for them.
Yeah.
So,
You know what's interesting is I got a brother who's wild, man, and he's a good dude. He's just had a lot of crazy things happen. I mean, like there was a short period of time where like he was almost dying like once or twice a year, and he was working in Corpus at a refinery. Big explosion happened. He ended up jumping into the canal. A lot of people got burned, so he was helping pull people out of the canal. He used to work for another company that was an electric company. He was working in Laredo. Him and a guy were in the bucket up by the high voltage wiring, and it arced into their bucket. And luckily for him, his arms locked up. He was able to hit the lever to push the button down, but the electricity has to leave. And when it left out of his coworker's hip. So it put a hole about that big in his coworker's hip. Another time, he was in a motorcycle accident. Car ran a light early in the morning, kind of glanced off of him, hit his head. He ended up going to the hospital. It was crazy because they didn't diagnose him with a concussion and they sent him home. A month later, his speech was all screwed up. He was throwing up all the time. He went back to the hospital. They said, oh, he's had a concussion this whole time. It was interesting because I saw his motorcycle helmet, and it was almost split in half. And it was funny because I'm an idiot, right? And I go, how does he not have a concussion? His helmet's almost split in half. Another time he was working for another company, or I think it's still another refinery. They had an electrical arc flash, burned him really bad. He never sued anybody, but it's interesting because, like, when you talk about potential earning capacity being diminished, I'm not going to say these things are directly tied to a certain incident, but when you think about the things that he's been through and how it's aged him to the point that he's aged now, there's a lot of body pain. There's been some surgeries to certain parts, joints and other things like that. And, he just was one of those guys where, I'm just going to keep working, And I mean, I don't know how that works. Would he have been able to keep his job had he filed a lawsuit? I don't know. But it's like, you don't really think about, a lot of times I think you can kind of look at your earning capacity being diminished caused by an accident, but you kind of look at it also as going, oh, I'm just getting old. And it's like, well, how much of that actually is you getting old? And how much of that were these having, high voltage electricity running through your body, right. Having to dive into the canal, having to get hit by a vehicle on a motorcycle and then being misdiagnosed for a concussion, his sleeping's terrible. Like, he'll fall asleep next to you and he does this crazy twitching thing where it's like this I don't know, it's just very traumatic. His arms flail, his arms kick. I don't know if he's gotten any better, but for a while he would have to sleep on the sofa by himself because nobody could sleep with him. He's had all these. His memory loss is terrible. There's all these things that it's kind of like, man, you should have gotten looked at by somebody.
Right.
I mean, I get loyalty to your company because you're providing for your family through that. But these are things that are rarities. Now, for him, it wasn't rare because, like I said, there was a time there that was like, Joe almost died again.
Yeah.
But I think that we just kind of don't really look at our earning capacity being diminished from something that happened to us 5 or 10 years ago. Now, maybe it's too late to do anything about it, but those are still things that I think people need to be more concerned with when something happens to them is, hey, am I going to be able to work this long?
Right.
My sister's got some medical issues, but it's more, I think, medical issues. But it's like there's certain people that's like, okay, I'm not going to make it to retirement. I physically am not going to be able to work to 65. I'm going to have to stop working at 56 or 58 or 60 or whatever it is. So I think a lot of times where if people have a legitimate claim, I think it's worth exploring. You know what I'm saying? That's because you never know. You don't really understand that diminishing, earning capacity. Like
right, the impact that's going to be in 5 to 10 years. And that's actually one of the most underdiagnosed injuries that we see, or that I've seen over the last 20 years of doing this, are head injuries. Because, folks think that, to have a brain injury, right, you have to be knocked out in a coma, that kind of thing.
Or like TBI kind of thing.
Right. So with TBIs, with brain injuries, we call them TBI, the traumatic brain injuries, but there's also what's called an MTBI, a mild traumatic brain injury. And there's generally a scale of 1 to 3 on the severity, right? 3 is, concussion, lost consciousness. On the 1, it doesn't, you don't have to have lost consciousness. There has to be a mechanism of injury, but the human brain is very fragile. And I think people underestimate the amount of force that can cause damage to the brain after being involved in an incident, right? And we see it all the time, and so we have specialists that look for that, but we're always on the lookout to make sure, like the things you just described, memory loss, speech, headaches. There are things that are concerning, and the good news for most of the mild traumatic brain injury cases are that there's usually a full recovery with intervention.
Sure.
That's the key. And but then when there's not, it gets worse over time. And so there's that's definitely I think a field that's being rightfully so people are paying more attention to, and a lot to do with the NFL and the discussion and looking at CTE and what's happening to players after their careers. And
when you think about like my nephew, for example, they start these kids at like 5 years old. When I was in school, I think we started in the 7th grade playing football, contact football. And so that's 6 years, for him, it was 13 years, it's like, even though they're little kids, it's still the brain sitting in fluid,
right,
being hit up against the skull,
right.
Well,
fortunately, I played, Pee-wee in middle school football as well. And also a big football fan, so I'm not being judgmental like it, but and the good thing is,
I'm not gonna hammer you on Arch Manning just yet.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, good. Because hey, right now we're okay. We'll see. The helmets have gotten better. That's one thing. The other thing is they've put in rules to minimize the number of high impact collisions, right? They're doing things to.
Are you talking about the red light, green light kickoffs?
The kickoffs, and then you've got the concussion protocols, like Arch Manning being an example. So I think you're doing more, but the reality is, yes, it's still football. It's still a contact sport. There's no way around it. And I'm not a medical expert. I can't sit here and say whether it's what's going to happen. But I do think it is. I feel like, just maybe like anecdotally, like I know fewer folks putting their kids in football for that reason, right? And I wonder if what it'll look like in 20 or 30 years, if it's going to be what it is now.
Yeah.
It's still,
it's changed drastically from what it was in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
It's pretty significant.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this too, since we're kind of in this area. Is there some legal statute that says, hey, if you decide to go play college football for UT and you get hurt or you get a TBI, you're not allowed to sue the school? Because I don't know how all that works out, but I guess maybe when you come to play college football, I don't know if there's a contract that's signed or a waiver or how that. I've often heard waivers don't carry much weight sometimes, and sometimes they do.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, is that one of those things where, and I'm not encouraging people to do it, but if you suffer something, let's say from a college sport or even the NFL or something like that, that you can come back and sue that entity?
Yes. So I'm not an expert in that, in sports law or in doing that specifically, but I can tell you that there's a doctrine called assumption of risk, where you when you engage in activities that carry inherent risk, such as injury such as a traumatic brain injury, it's going to be difficult to say you weren't aware of what you were getting into when you did that.
Especially at this point with all the information that's out there.
Right. And now there's I think that's just kind of a broad brush, though, because like there's different probably examples of like mismanagement. You've got team doctors, and where do they fit in on this? And then there's and now you essentially have the college athletics being like pros now with NIL money, and I mean there's all kinds of variables, and I know that there's some of these players have insurance policies. In the event that they do get hurt and there's a claim they need to file, they can file it on that for, whether it's a disability or lost income potential as a result of an injury. I know that there's a lot of college players that do that now. So there's different angles to that, I think. But yeah, no, I think it would be hard. The part you said about the waivers is for minors don't have legal capacity to sign waivers, so the parent signs it, but it's not.
But the parent isn't taking the risk at the same time, right? Because the kid's the one involved in the sport.
Right. Well, the only thing a parent can waive on behalf of their child that is their own claim for medical, because they're legally responsible for medical bills.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you can't have a parent waive their child's right to recovery by signing a waiver on their behalf. The only time that can happen was when in a court setting when we represent children who've been in crashes and they're being represented by, say, a parent. For it to be binding on the minor when they turn 18, in other words, they can't come back and file a lawsuit from that. The law is this: if let's say a 10-year-old gets into a crash as a passenger, it's somebody else's fault, they get hurt, they don't do anything, right? Normally in Texas, it's a 2-year statute of limitations. So you would think, okay, so on their 12th anniversary, or the second anniversary of when that happened, they're 12 years old, they lose the right. No, when they turn 18, they have 2 years. So the only time that doesn't happen is when there's a court has to approve the terms of a settlement for it to be binding on them. So again, that's very different than when you go somewhere and just have a parent sign a waiver and say, here you go. It doesn't mean that the minor means like they can never do anything. So I think it's a false sense of security. But or maybe you have some parents that don't realize that's the case and then think, oh, well, I signed a waiver, my child can't do anything. So
yeah.
But no, it's sports with football specifically. That's just. With NFL players, I know that they had a resolution actually where they had former NFL players, and I think they've set up a fund where they can file a claim, and there's money set aside. But then it becomes a battle of showing that, oh, was this caused by football? Was this not? And that kind of thing. So
yeah. Interesting. Hey George, before I let you go, man, we've gone a long time.
Let's see what happens.
Oh, it's been a long time.
Oh, nice. That's good. Yeah.
Let's. What's your opinion on NIL, man?
Well, there's nothing we can do now. It's not going to change. But I have mixed feelings about it. I have mixed feelings about it because I can see, like with anything, I try to see both sides of it and then make a decision as to which outweighs the other, Yeah. And I know that as a UT football fan, it's a benefit, right? Like that you have, but as like for here locally, UTSA, it stinks. How does a program, which is a great program, compete with a budget like UT or A&M, you name the school, and keep players? And so but at the same time, on the plus side, right, I see that, and it's not just, oh, my favorite team gets to sign the best players, but it's, you've got players, many of whom come from tough economic circumstances, who are generating a lot of revenue for their schools that get to at least get some benefit from that, right? And so there's an equity argument in that. And so I don't think you can sit here and say on its face, this is bad. It's, what is this going to do to collegiate athletics? And it's not just football. I mean,
sure.
This is all sports, right? And so, I think, I think we're going to have to see how this plays out over time, what it does, what it does to college athletes, not just now, but 5 years from now, like 10 years from now, does this, because I have a hard time. I don't like people being taken advantage of, as you can tell what I do, right? And I do think that it was fundamentally unfair for college athletes to not be able to, enjoy some of the fruits of their labor, right?
Yeah.
But I get it. It's supposed to be amateur sports, But anybody that it hasn't been amateur sports for a while,
And I mean, even when people getting paid behind, under the table kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because I don't know, man. I take a long time to get used to something. Like I like when things are left alone, But at the same time, I think if you're a high performer, there's a lot of money in college football, especially at some of the more, I guess, popular schools, more established schools. There's a lot of money that goes into that, and these guys are, again, we're talking about future earning potential, right? So you're wrecking your body for 2, 3, 4 years, right? And so I love the idea of Nike coming and giving Joe Blow a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. I don't like the jumping from school to school thing. There was, I forget who it was. Maybe it was the Vanderbilt guy. I can't remember, but they were able to basically say that their JUCO time didn't count against their college playing time. So they can earn money while in junior college, under NIL, but that didn't, they can still go play their 4 years. And so a lot of that's very interesting. And I love the idea of these guys finding another avenue to make more money because they can kind of go do this at junior college schools. One thing you're finding is the D1 level guys, now all of a sudden it's like, if I'm a D1 guy, but I'm not going to play very much, I'm going to go to D2 and I'm going to play a lot and I'm going to make some money over there, So it's interesting because the level of athlete as you go down from D1, it's gotten better, And so, which is good, anytime you can make it more competitive and more exciting, that's great. The only thing that I get a little fishy on, like I said, is the jumping from school to school, right. And is that a big deal? I don't know. But I always feel like, then this is where old man Gabe shows up, right? And I'm like, I always feel like the education part of student athlete was the last part. It was athlete first and student. Right. And now it's even more so, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So now the academics is farther over there because you're going to make some good money now. Mm-hmm. But it's part of me wants to go, hey, young man, you're going to have to work till you're 65 at least. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. And it's what is that going to look like when you're 45? What is your body going to be doing? What is your brain going to be doing? Mm-hmm. And so part of me is kind of let's still get that education, man. Yeah. And you know what? I don't know what that looks like, right? And I don't want to, I'm not applying rules to NIL right now. But I don't know if it's something like, hey, if you're a high performer in the classroom, you're eligible for a higher percentage of NIL. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Let's do something where we're still incentivizing the academic side. Right. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to get them through the rest of their life.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the challenges that professional athletes face historically across all sports, right, is that they don't take into account, many of them seen the kind of money they're seeing. There's documentaries on this, lots of examples, how to manage that kind of money and then also plan at 22, 23, 24, 25, and then realizing that your career is you're not going to be making this kind of money for the next
But when you're 24, 25, you think you're going to live forever.
Right. No, but now you're taking 18 to 22-year-olds, and I'm not saying they're getting NFL money or NBA money, but they're getting a lot more than as many of them I've ever had. And what's being done to help? And I'm sure I would hope the schools are involved in providing some financial advice and that they're taking these things into consideration. But yeah, you're right. If the academic component gets lost, because I don't have the statistics, but I would venture to guess that the majority of NIL recipients aren't going to play pros in the pros. That the majority, right? And so, what are they doing to figure out what the next chapter is, right? And if you're getting, if you're just bouncing to school to the portal, or just not, if it's just obviously you're going to school just to play sports, you're going to see a lot of people. I think, that's why I said, like, in 5 years we'll see 10 years following up with these folks and see how did that change their trajectory? Did it change their trajectory, and what does it look like now?
Yeah.
And so hopefully, it's being used for good, and it's being used to, even if it's launch whatever a different career, and then great. But I think, like with all things, you find ways to improve systems.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely some improvements in that system, especially with the portal. There's it's tough, because one thing that made college athletics unique, specifically for me, college football, was that there was a lot of loyalty, right?
Sure. That's the fun part.
It's blood, right? It's like, I'm a Cowboys fan, I feel passionate about that sometimes, but not as maybe passionate is about, like I do with the Burnt Orange and Longhorns and rivalries.
I don't want to be ugly, George, but Thanksgiving Day is going to be real rough for you guys.
We'll see. My wife is going to be with you. She agrees with you. We'll see. A&M's looking good. I can't take anything away from them. They look like they've figured it out this year.
Yeah.
And but with rivalry games, you never know what's going to happen. That's what's exciting about. But that's college athletics, and that's why I love it. But it's just, when now you can, you have a player just jump in the portal and hop onto the other school that you hate. It's like, wait a minute, I thought you were bleeding Burnt Orange or vice versa, right?
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's I still think it's great. I still think college athletics is great. I do think the NIL, from a fairness standpoint, has the right idea.
Yeah. What's interesting is I hadn't really paid attention to the draft. I got buddies that love it. That's all. I got a buddy that'll sit there and watch it for however many days it goes. But I actually paid a little more attention because of Deion's son, Shador.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me because I was hearing these numbers some of these kids were making in college. And then when I found out what their NFL contract was, I was a little disappointed. It was like $2 million to go play in the NFL, and he was getting $4 at another school would have given him $4.
Right.
It's kind of like that's where you go. And if I'm a 23-year-old, I'm going, I'm going to stay in college another year. Not because of academics, but because of the money. Mm-hmm. It was a little shocking to see how little some of those guys make. Now, I'm sure there's endorsement deals and other avenues to make money, but just the NFL to the college, some of the college NIL amounts people were getting, it was a little shocking, man. I'll admit, I didn't expect that. So.
Right. Everybody assumes that if you're a professional athlete, you're in the NFL, especially, which, again, I don't have the data in front of me, but I know that those are all, those numbers are not as big as some people think they are. And you, and which is why the draft order and being drafted in the first round in the top 10, all that is huge.
Yeah.
It's night and day. And, and I think, but you've got 53 people on a roster plus your practice squad. I guess I can see from the economic standpoint where they have to have some limit on it versus the NBA, right? Where, even their lowest paid guys are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And they're not, typically facing the same types of risk that some of these other players are. So if I was blessed with athleticism that translated in professional sports, I would either be a field goal kicker or play in the NBA.
Yeah.
Or baseball. Baseball players
yeah.
really well, and they have long careers.
Yeah.
So, but that didn't happen. So I stick to the law thing.
Yeah, God blessed me with good looks, charm, and the ability to break arms off of a chair. So
nice. Well, yeah, hopefully you don't use the third one right now.
I hope not. So, George, where can people find you?
They can visit me. Our website is getgeorge.com. Easy enough. Just getgeorge.com. Our number's 210-225-0909. If anybody wants to ever email me directly, my email is george@salinastriallaw.com.
Okay. And y'all got any social media or anything people can follow?
Yes, we're on Instagram and Facebook, and we're not on TikTok, but I think that will change in the future.
Yeah. And if people are interested, I mean, you guys do consultations?
Oh yeah, all our consultations are free. Sometimes folks will call about a non-personal injury case, and we'll recommend, certain firms that we think could do quality work. And so the folks are always welcome to call our office. We don't charge ever for consultations. And like I said, we take every call seriously, and we look at everything. And if it's something that we can't help, we usually provide some avenues, some alternatives, explanations. Importantly, that I'm always, despite how we've grown, maintain that level of customer service.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, George. When I first saw you, it was at a Special Olympics event, and you were very engaged in what was going on. And it's interesting because you can tell a lot about a person by how they interact with their children and how involved they are. And you're very involved. You interact quite a lot. Nina loves your boy, and your wife's super helpful. She works hard as well. And it's one of those things where it's very telling. I've enjoyed it. I've had a good time talking with you. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be on here. I really enjoyed this talk. I didn't realize how long we had gone. That's awesome. That's good because it went by fast.
Yeah,
like you said it would. And again, thanks for the opportunity and for what you're doing, and especially what your wife is doing for my son. How much that means.
I'll tell her, man. She's don't get me wrong. She's a pain when she gets home, but she does love her job.
She's good at it. So,
thank you, George.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina podcast.
Yo, Barry.